I never thought that the mundane routine of my daily life would spiral into the realm of the inexplicable, the terrifying. It began on an ordinary Friday evening. I had just returned from work, a tedious day filled with the usual meetings and paperwork. My small apartment, though humble, had always been a sanctuary. Yet that night, as I turned the key in the lock and stepped inside, a chill crept up my spine. It was an unseasonably warm night, but the air inside felt cold, clammy even. I shrugged it off, attributing it to a draft from the old windows that never quite sealed properly. As I settled into my usual routine, the feeling of unease lingered, refusing to dissipate. I flicked on the television, hoping that the mindless chatter of a sitcom would drown out my discomfort. Instead, the screen remained blank, a dull, lifeless gray. I tried several channels, but it was the same on each one. Frustrated, I switched it off and reached for my phone, only to find that the signal had vanished. No bars, no connection, just an eerie silence. The hours dragged by, each tick of the clock growing louder, more ominous. I decided to distract myself with a book, a well-worn horror novel that had always been a favorite. But as I read, the words seemed to blur and shift on the page, forming nonsensical sentences and twisted images. It was as if the story had taken on a life of its own, morphing into something dark and malevolent. My heart pounded in my chest, and I slammed the book shut, its cover now seeming sinister, almost mocking. It was then that I heard the first sound, a low, rhythmic thumping from somewhere deep within the apartment. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but it grew steadily louder, more insistent. My rational mind told me it was just the pipes, old plumbing acting up. But a primal fear had taken root, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I stood frozen, straining to pinpoint the source of the noise. Slowly, I made my way through the apartment, each step feeling heavier, more reluctant. The sound seemed to emanate from behind the walls, a relentless pounding that resonated through the floorboards. I reached the hallway, where the light flickered weakly, casting long, unsettling shadows. The noise grew louder still, a deafening rhythm that reverberated through my skull. My hand trembled as I reached for the door to the bedroom, the air thick with an almost palpable dread. As I opened the door, the thumping ceased abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. The room was dark, save for a faint sliver of moonlight that seeped through the curtains. I scanned the room, searching for any sign of disturbance, but everything seemed in order. Yet, the feeling of unease persisted, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. I took a hesitant step forward, my footfalls echoing in the stillness. It was then that I saw it, a faint outline in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light. It was a figure, hunched and misshapen, its eyes glinting with a malevolent gleam. I blinked, convinced that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the figure remained, its presence undeniable. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. The figure moved then, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a jolt of fear through my body. It seemed to glide rather than walk, its movements unnaturally smooth. It stopped just a few feet away, and I could see it more clearly now. Its face was obscured by shadows, but there was something grotesque, almost inhuman about it. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but every rational thought was drowned out by the sheer terror that gripped me. I stumbled backward, my hands fumbling for the light switch. The room was bathed in harsh, artificial light, and for a moment, I thought the figure had vanished. But then I saw it again, closer this time. Its eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The figure reached out, its hand outstretched, fingers long and claw-like. In a panic, I fled the room, my heart pounding in my ears. I ran down the hallway, the floorboards creaking under my frantic steps. The walls seemed to close in around me, the shadows deepening, becoming more tangible. I reached the living room, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The door was just a few steps away, a tantalizing promise of escape. But as I reached for the doorknob, it twisted on its own, the door swinging open to reveal a darkness that seemed to writhe and pulse. I took a step back, the fear paralyzing me. The figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and twisting as it moved. It was no longer just a figure. It was a manifestation of my deepest fears, a nightmare given flesh. I backed away, my mind struggling to comprehend the horror before me. The figure advanced, its eyes never leaving mine. I stumbled over a chair, falling to the floor. The figure loomed over me, its presence suffocating, overwhelming. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable, but instead of the cold touch of those claw-like fingers, I felt a strange warmth, a sensation that seemed out of place in the midst of such terror. I opened my eyes to find the figure had stopped, its form wavering, almost as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. The eyes that had once glinted with malevolence now seemed conflicted, as if some part of it was fighting against the darkness that consumed it. The room seemed to tremble, the air heavy with a palpable tension. The figure's form shifted, becoming more human, more familiar. It was then that I recognized the face, the features that had been distorted by fear and darkness. It was me, or rather, a twisted reflection of myself, consumed by the very fears that had brought it into existence. The realization struck me like a lightning bolt. The figure, the nightmare, was a manifestation of my own mind, my own fears given form. I had created this terror, and only I could dispel it. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stood, facing the figure with a newfound determination. It hesitated, its form flickering, as if unsure of its own existence. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the figure. The warmth spread, a comforting sensation that seemed to chase away the darkness. The figure's eyes met mine, and I saw in them a reflection of my own fear, my own vulnerability. It was a part of me, a part that I had to acknowledge, to confront. As I stood there, the room began to change, the shadows receding, the oppressive silence lifting. The figure's form dissolved, leaving behind a sense of peace, of clarity. I was alone once more, but no longer afraid. The apartment, once a place of dread, now felt like a sanctuary again. I knew that the terror I had faced was not gone, but transformed. It was a reminder of the darkness that resides within us all, a darkness that we must confront and understand. As I sat down, my heart still pounding, I realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more nights, more fears to face, but I was ready. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, and as I glanced at the clock, its ticking now a comforting rhythm, I knew that whatever lay ahead, I would face it with courage and resolve. For the true horror is not the darkness itself, but the fear that it instills, and I had learned to face that fear head-on. In the days following that harrowing night, I couldn't shake the sense that my confrontation with the figure had awakened something within me. Each moment was shadowed by a heightened awareness, a feeling that I was not alone even in the most solitary of places. The world outside my apartment seemed to move on as usual, people bustling about, traffic humming. But my own reality had shifted irrevocably. The changes were subtle at first. The flickering of lights that once seemed a mere annoyance now felt like a signal, a coded message I was just beginning to understand. The sounds in my apartment, once dismissed as the creaks and groans of an old building, now seemed to form a pattern, a language of the unseen. I tried to distract myself, diving into work, consuming books and media, but nothing could drown out the creeping sense of dread that clung to me like a second skin. One evening, after yet another restless day, I found myself standing at the window, staring out into the darkened streets below. The city was alive with its usual nocturnal activities, but my eyes were drawn to a particular figure standing under a street lamp. At first glance, it appeared to be just another passerby, but something about the way it stood, motionless, sent a shiver down my spine. I watched, transfixed, as the figure seemed to sense my gaze, its head slowly turning upward to meet my eyes. A sudden rush of fear gripped me, and I stepped back, the curtains falling shut, unable to shake the feeling. I resolved to confront whatever was happening to me. I began keeping a journal, documenting every strange occurrence, every unexplainable feeling. The entries started as mere bullet points, flickering lights, strange noises, fleeting glimpses of shadows, but they soon grew into detailed accounts of my experiences, my thoughts, my fears. I hoped that by putting everything on paper, I could find some semblance of control, of understanding. One night, as I sat at my desk, the journal opened before me. I heard it again, the rhythmic thumping that had haunted me before. My heart raced, but this time, instead of retreating, I forced myself to move toward the sound. It seemed to come from the walls, from deep within the very structure of the building. With each step, the noise grew louder, more insistent, guiding me like a macabre beacon. I found myself in front of a small, inconspicuous door at the end of the hallway, one I had never noticed before. It looked old, almost antique, with a tarnished brass handle that seemed out of place in the modern building. The thumping was deafening now, reverberating through my bones. I hesitated for a moment, fear threatening to overwhelm me, but I knew I had to see what lay beyond. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark, the air thick with a musty, oppressive scent. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw that it was filled with strange artifacts, old books, faded photographs, and objects that defy categorization. It was a relic of another time, a hidden corner of the building that had been forgotten. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface covered in a layer of dust. The frame was intricately carved, depicting scenes of myth and legend, strange creatures intertwined in an eternal dance. The mirror seemed to pulse with an eerie light, drawing me closer. I approached it cautiously, my reflection growing clearer with each step. But as I stood before the mirror, my reflection began to change. The familiar face staring back at me twisted and contorted, the features shifting into something grotesque, monstrous. I watched in horror as my doppelganger reached out, its hand pressing against the glass, as if trying to break through. I stumbled back, a cry escaping my lips. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and the figure stepped through, its eyes locking onto mine with a malevolent gleam. It was me, yet not me, a twisted reflection, a manifestation of my darkest fears. The room seemed to close in around us, the air heavy with a palpable tension. I could feel the figure's presence, its cold breath on my skin, its gaze piercing through me. I knew I had to confront it, to face the darkness within myself. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stood tall, meeting the figure's gaze with a steely resolve. It hesitated, its form flickering, uncertain. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the mirror's surface. The glass felt cold, almost alive, but I pressed on, pushing through the barrier between us. The room erupted in a cacophony of sound and light, the mirror shattering into 1,000 pieces. The figure dissolved into a swirling mist, the darkness receding. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, the weight of the encounter pressing down on me. As the room returned to silence, I looked around, the artifacts now bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. The sense of dread had lifted, replaced by a profound clarity. I knew that the darkness was still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, but I had faced it and survived. The journal lay open on the floor, its pages filled with my thoughts, my fears. I picked it up, realizing that it was not just a record of my experiences, but a guide, a map through the labyrinth of my own mind. In the days that followed, I continued to document everything, each entry a step toward understanding. The strange occurrences lessened, the thumping fading into a distant memory. But I knew that the battle was not over, that the darkness within me would always be a part of who I was. It was a reminder of my vulnerability, my humanity. The city outside my window seemed unchanged, but I knew that I had changed. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, more resilient. And as I looked out into the night, I felt a sense of peace, of acceptance. The figure in the mirror was gone, but its lessons remained. I continued my routines, my work, my life, but with a new perspective. Each day was a step forward, a journey into the unknown. The journal grew thicker, filled with my thoughts, my fears, my triumphs. It was a testament to my resilience, my determination to face whatever lay ahead. And as the years passed, I found that the darkness within me was not something to be feared, but to be understood. It was a part of who I was, a reflection of my own complexity. The figure in the mirror had shown me that, and I was grateful for the lesson. I knew that there would be more challenges, more fears to face, but I was ready, for I had learned that true horror is not the darkness itself, but the fear that it instills. And I had faced that fear head-on, emerging stronger, more resolute. The journey was far from over, but I was prepared for whatever lay ahead. I didn't know how I ended up at the old mansion on the outskirts of town. The place had always been a topic of hushed conversations, a monument to secrets buried deep. My curiosity, against all better judgment, led me to its rotting doorstep. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, the kind that settled in your lungs and made breathing a conscious effort. Each step I took echoed in the hollow corridors, as if the house was whispering back at me, daring me to go further. I fumbled with my flashlight, the weak beam barely piercing the dense darkness that clung to every surface. The wallpaper, once a lavish red, was now faded and peeling, revealing grotesque patterns of mold and rot. My footsteps stirred up clouds of dust, swirling like spirits disturbed from their eternal slumber. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each sound magnified in the oppressive silence. There was an undeniable presence in the house, something that lurked just beyond the reach of my light, watching, waiting. As I ventured deeper, the temperature dropped noticeably, an icy chill seeping into my bones. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The hallway stretched out before me, seeming to elongate with every step I took. Doors lined the walls, some ajar, others tightly shut, their brass handles tarnished and cold to the touch. I chose one at random, pushing it open with a creak that sent shivers down my spine. The room beyond was a macabre tableau, a child's nursery frozen in time. The crib, draped in cobwebs, stood as a silent witness to whatever horrors had transpired here. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, plunging the room into pitch-black darkness. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled with the flashlight, the beam flickering before finally stabilizing. In the corner of the room, a rocking chair began to move, its rhythmic creaking filling the air. I was not alone. The shadows seemed to dance around me, whispering secrets I was never meant to hear. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a drum signaling my impending doom. I forced myself to move, to break free from the paralyzing fear that threatened to consume me. The chair continued to rock, but there was no one in it, no visible force propelling it. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the eerie sight. As I reached the door, something cold and clammy brushed against my hand. I yanked it back with a gasp, my flashlight revealing a handprint on the door, a handprint that glowed faintly in the dark. I stumbled back into the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air was thick with tension, as if the house itself was alive, feeding off my fear. I had to get out. The stairs leading to the upper floor loomed ahead, and despite every instinct screaming at me to leave, I found myself drawn to them. The steps groaned under my weight, each one a reluctant witness to my ascent. At the top, the hallway stretched out like a gaping maw, ready to swallow me whole. I pressed on, driven by a morbid curiosity that refused to be silenced. The doors up here were different, larger, more ornate, as if guarding something precious. I reached for one, my hand trembling. The handle was ice cold, and as I turned it, a shiver ran down my spine. The door swung open to reveal a grand bedroom, opulent and decayed in equal measure. A large canopy bed dominated the room, its once luxurious drapes now tattered and moth-eaten. The fireplace, cold and dark, cast long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe in the dim light. Something moved in the corner of my vision, and I whipped around, my flashlight's beam dancing wildly. There, in the corner, stood a figure, barely more than a silhouette. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and grotesque. I froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The figure tilted its head, as if regarding me with a mix of curiosity and malevolence. It took a step forward, and I could see its face. No, not a face. A grotesque mask of flesh and bone, twisted into a permanent rictus of agony. I backed away, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could hear it. The figure moved closer, its movements fluid and unnatural, as if it was gliding rather than walking. My flashlight flickered, the beam faltering as the figure loomed ever closer. In a blind panic, I turned and ran, the hallway a blur of darkness and fear. The house seemed to come alive around me, doors slamming shut, shadows reaching out to grasp me. I stumbled and fell, my hands scraping against the rough wood of the floor. I scrambled to my feet, my breath ragged and desperate. The figure was still there, always just a step behind, its presence a constant reminder of the doom that awaited me. I burst through a door, finding myself in the attic, a maze of forgotten relics and cobwebs. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. I could hear the figure's footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, a predator toying with its prey. I hid behind an old trunk, my body trembling with fear. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside my hiding place. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. The silence was deafening, the anticipation unbearable. I could feel its presence, just inches away, waiting for me to make a mistake. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would go away. The seconds stretched into eternity, but the figure did not move. Finally, I dared to peek out from my hiding place, my heart skipping a beat as I saw it standing there, motionless, its hollow eyes staring into mine. I stifled a scream, my body frozen in place. Slowly, agonizingly, the figure raised a hand, pointing directly at me. I knew then that there was no escape, no way out of this nightmare. With a surge of adrenaline, I bolted for my hiding place, the figure's gaze burning into my back. I ran blindly, my vision blurred by tears of terror. The attic seemed to stretch on forever, an endless labyrinth designed to trap me. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps growing louder, faster. I tripped over something, falling hard to the floor. My flashlight skidded away, its beam flickering out. I was plunged into darkness, the figure's presence looming over me. I could feel its cold breath on my neck, its fingers brushing against my skin. I screamed, the sound echoing through the attic. The figure did not relent, its grip tightening around me. I struggled, but it was no use. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I knew then that I would never escape the horrors of that old mansion. The last thing I heard was the figure's voice, a guttural whisper that sent shivers down my spine. It spoke of ancient evils, of a curse that could never be broken. And as the darkness consumed me, I realized that I was now a part of that twisted legacy, forever trapped within the walls of the mansion, a ghostly wraith doomed to haunt its corridors for all eternity. The darkness was consuming me, the figure's cold grip tightening with every passing moment. My vision blurred, and I could feel myself slipping away. But then, a sudden surge of willpower jolted through me. I wasn't ready to give in, not yet. With a desperate burst of strength, I wrenched myself free from the figure's grasp, stumbling backward and falling to the floor. The attic was still pitch black, but I could hear the figure moving, its grotesque form shuffling through the debris. I groped around in the darkness, my hands brushing against old trunks and forgotten relics. My fingers closed around something heavy and metallic, a rusted old lantern. With trembling hands, I fumbled to open it, praying that it still had some oil left. My fingers were slick with sweat, making the task even more difficult. Finally, the lantern sputtered to life, casting a flickering light that pushed back the oppressive darkness. The figure recoiled from the light, its monstrous visage contorting in a silent scream. I seized the opportunity, scrambling to my feet and backing away. The light from the lantern was weak, but it was enough to keep the figure at bay. I could see it more clearly now, a twisted, nightmarish form, its flesh a patchwork of decayed and rotting tissue. Its eyes, hollow and empty, seemed to bore into my very soul. I needed to find a way out, and fast. The attic was a maze, but I had to keep moving. I turned and ran, the lantern swinging wildly in my hand. The flickering light cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it difficult to distinguish between reality and illusion. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure's footsteps echoed behind me, a constant reminder of the terror that pursued me. As I made my way through the attic, I stumbled upon an old trapdoor. It was partially concealed under a pile of debris, but the worn iron ring gave it away. I yanked it open, the hinges protesting with a loud creak. The passage below was dark and foreboding, but it was my only chance. I descended the narrow staircase, the lantern's light barely illuminating the steps. The air grew colder, and the walls closed in around me. The staircase seemed to go on forever, winding deeper and deeper into the bowels of the mansion. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. The oppressive silence was broken only by the faint drip of water and the distant sound of the figure's footsteps above. I reached the bottom of the stairs, finding myself in a dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with ancient stone, damp and covered in moss. I moved cautiously, the lantern held high. The corridor led me to a series of rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. There were remnants of long-forgotten lives, faded portraits, broken furniture, and decayed remnants of what once were luxurious tapestries. One room in particular caught my attention. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light flickering from within. I pushed the door open, my heart racing. The room was a library, its shelves filled with dusty old books and scrolls. The air was thick with the musty scent of aged paper. In the center of the room was a large oak desk, its surface cluttered with tomes and parchments. But what drew my attention most was the fire burning in the fireplace. The flames danced and crackled, casting an eerie glow that made the shadows seem to move. I approached the desk, my eyes scanning the various documents strewn across it. There were handwritten notes, sketches of the mansion, and journal entries detailing the history of the house. One journal in particular stood out. Its cover was worn and faded, but the pages inside were filled with meticulous handwriting. As I read, a chilling story began to unfold. The mansion had once belonged to a wealthy family, the Montagues, who were rumored to have dabbled in dark rituals and forbidden knowledge. The journal detailed their descent into madness, driven by a relentless pursuit of immortality. They had performed unspeakable acts, sacrificing their own kin in the name of their twisted experiments. The final entry was a desperate plea for forgiveness, written by the last surviving Montague. It spoke of a curse that had befallen the family, dooming their souls to eternal torment within the mansion's walls. A sudden noise snapped me out of my reading. The figure was still out there, searching for me. I needed to find a way to break the curse, to put an end to the horrors that plagued the mansion. My eyes fell upon an old book, its cover embossed with strange symbols. It was a grimoire, filled with ancient spells and incantations. I grabbed it, hoping that it held the answers I sought. As I left the library, I could feel the figure's presence growing stronger. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I made my way back through the corridor, my mind racing with the knowledge I had uncovered. I needed to find a place to perform the ritual, to summon the spirits and break the curse. I found myself in a grand ballroom, its once magnificent chandeliers now hanging precariously from the ceiling. The room was vast, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected the flickering light of the lantern. I placed the grimoire on a dusty old table in the center of the room, flipping through its pages until I found the ritual. The instructions were clear, but the ingredients were not. I searched the room, gathering what I could find: candles, salt, and an old ceremonial dagger. As I arranged the items on the table, I could feel the figure drawing closer. The air grew heavy, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. I lit the candles, their flames casting an eerie glow on the walls. The ritual required a sacrifice, but I was determined to find another way. I began to chant the incantation, my voice trembling with fear. The room seemed to come alive, the shadows writhing and twisting as the air crackled with energy. The figure appeared in the doorway, its grotesque form illuminated by the candlelight. I continued to chant, my voice growing stronger as the ritual progressed. The figure stepped into the room, its eyes locked on mine. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I could feel the figure's presence, its malevolent energy pressing down on me. I raised the ceremonial dagger, my hands trembling. The final words of the incantation echoed through the room, and a blinding light filled the space. The figure let out a piercing scream, its form writhing and contorting as the light consumed it. When the light faded, the figure was gone. The room was silent, the air still. I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion. The curse had been broken, but the mansion still held its secrets. I knew that I couldn't leave. Not yet. There were still questions that needed answers, and I was determined to find them. I gathered my strength and made my way back through the mansion, retracing my steps. The atmosphere had changed, the oppressive darkness lifting slightly. The shadows no longer seemed to follow me, and the air was warmer. I reached the library, determined to find more answers. The grimoire had been useful, but there was still so much I didn't understand. I spent hours poring over the journal and other documents, piecing together the history of the Montague family. Their descent into madness had begun with a discovery, a hidden chamber beneath the mansion, filled with ancient artifacts and forbidden knowledge. They had become obsessed with the idea of immortality, performing dark rituals in a desperate attempt to cheat death. But their actions had unleashed something far more sinister. The spirits they had summoned were not benevolent, and the family's attempts to control them had backfired horribly. The mansion had become a prison for their souls, and the curse had been passed down through the generations. The figure I had encountered was the last of the Montagues, trapped in a nightmarish existence for all eternity. As I read, I began to understand the true nature of the curse. It was not just a punishment for the Montague family's actions, but a warning to anyone who sought to tamper with forces beyond their understanding. The mansion was a monument to their hubris, a dark reminder of the consequences of their actions. I knew that I couldn't leave without uncovering the secrets of the hidden chamber. The answers I sought were buried there, waiting to be discovered. I gathered my things and made my way through the mansion, following the clues I had uncovered. I was never the kind of person to believe in ghosts, curses, or anything supernatural. I was always the logical type, the one who explained away strange noises in the night as just the wind, shadows moving in the corner of my eye as tricks of the mind. But there are things that happen in this world that logic cannot explain, things that leave a mark on you, twisting your perception of reality until you no longer know what's real and what's a nightmare. I learned this the hard way, and I don't know if I will ever recover from what I experienced. It all started when I moved into an old house on the outskirts of town. It was a beautiful place, far too large for just me, but the price was too good to pass up. A grand Victorian-style home, with towering walls and windows that stretched up to the sky. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something, an uneasiness, like the house was watching me, waiting. But I told myself it was just the unfamiliarity of a new place. I had always lived in small apartments, cramped and crowded, and now I had endless space to myself. It was only natural that it felt strange. The first few nights were quiet. I spent my time unpacking, settling in, and familiarizing myself with the layout of the house. There were rooms I didn't even know what to do with. An old study filled with dusty books, a sitting room with antique furniture covered in white sheets. I only used the bedroom, kitchen, and living room. The rest of the house remained untouched. And yet, despite my attempts to make the place feel like home, I could never shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It started with small things. Objects weren't where I left them. A chair slightly pulled out from the table when I was sure I had pushed it in. A door that I had closed standing slightly ajar. I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness, my mind playing tricks on me. But then came the sounds. Footsteps creaking in the hallway at night when I was in bed. A whisper, so faint I couldn't make out the words, just at the edge of hearing. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling as though someone was standing right beside my bed, watching me. But when I turned on the light, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination, the way an empty house can make you feel uneasy. But the more I ignored it, the worse it got. One night, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I felt the blanket slowly being pulled off of me. I shot up, heart pounding, and saw nothing. The room was still silent, but the feeling of something lingering in the air was undeniable. I started keeping a light on at night after that, even though I told myself I was being ridiculous. Then the voices started. Not whispers this time, but clear, distinct voices. I would hear them in the middle of the night, sometimes outside my bedroom door, sometimes from the hallway, sometimes right beside me. They weren't loud, but they were persistent. A woman's voice, pleading, desperate. A man's voice, low and angry. But no matter how fast I turned, No matter how much I searched, I never saw anyone. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I caught movement in the mirror. At first, I thought it was just my reflection, a trick of the light. But when I looked closer, I saw her. A woman standing behind me, her face pale, her eyes sunken, her mouth twisted in silent agony. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just the empty bathroom, the soft hum of the overhead light. My breath came in ragged gasps, my hands trembling. I barely slept that night. The image of her burned into my mind. The next morning, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I went to the town library, searching for any information about the house. What I found made my blood run cold. Years ago, a family had lived there, a man, his wife, and their daughter. But something had gone terribly wrong. The man had lost his mind, claimed his wife was possessed, and had locked her away in one of the upstairs rooms. When neighbors finally investigated, they found her body, frail and lifeless, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. The man had vanished without a trace, and the daughter had been sent away, never to return. That night, I could barely bring myself to go back into the house. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the windows, felt like a warning. I stayed in the living room, lights on, my back pressed against the couch. But the house wouldn't let me rest. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath coming out in white puffs. And then I heard it, a scraping sound, slow and deliberate, coming from upstairs. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to leave, to never come back. But something stronger compelled me forward. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the stairs, each step heavy with dread. The sound was coming from the study, the room I had never entered. The door was slightly open, just enough for a sliver of darkness to spill into the hallway. I pushed the door open. The room was untouched, covered in dust, but in the far corner, a wardrobe stood slightly ajar. The sound was coming from inside. My hands shook as I reached for the handle, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hesitated for a long moment before finally pulling it open. Inside there was nothing, just an empty, dusty space. And then I felt it, a breath against my ear, a hand ice cold, grabbing my wrist. I screamed and stumbled backward, the flashlight flickering wildly. The room had changed. The walls, once covered in peeling wallpaper, were now stained with something dark. The furniture was overturned, broken, as though something had been thrown around violently. And in the middle of it all stood the woman from the mirror, her eyes locked onto mine, filled with something I couldn't understand. A mix of sorrow and anger, pleading and accusation. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She reached toward me, fingers skeletal and trembling. I bolted from the room, nearly tripping down the stairs in my desperate attempt to get away. The house seemed to close in around me, the air thick with something I couldn't describe. I made it to the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, the walls groaned, and then, suddenly, silence. The door swung open by itself. I didn't look back. I ran into the night, the cold air stinging my lungs. I didn't stop until I was far away, until I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. I never went back to that house. I never even looked at it again. I don't know what I saw that night, what I felt, but I know one thing for certain. Some places are meant to be left alone. The moment I stepped outside, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, but it was fleeting. The air was sharp against my skin, yet I was drenched in sweat. I ran until my legs could no longer carry me, stopping only when I reached the main road, where the streetlights cast pools of yellow glow against the pavement. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I looked back once, just once, at that house standing in the distance, its dark silhouette towering against the night sky. I expected to see her, expected to see that hollow, sunken face staring at me from a window. But there was nothing, only darkness. But I knew better. I knew she was there, watching, waiting. I checked myself into a small motel that night, refusing to be alone. The room was dimly lit, with old wallpaper peeling at the corners, and the faint smell of mildew lingering in the air. But it was safe. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I locked the door, secured the chain, and collapsed onto the bed. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. The way she reached for me, the way her mouth moved without sound. She was trying to tell me something. But what? When dawn finally broke, I knew I couldn't leave things unfinished. I needed to understand what had happened in that house. Why did she appear to me? Why did she try to communicate? My rational mind told me to forget it, to move on, to never step foot in that cursed place again. But something deeper, something unexplainable, urged me to uncover the truth. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was madness. I wasn't sure anymore. I spent the next day at the local records office, sifting through old newspaper articles, trying to piece together the house's dark past. The deeper I dug, the more horrifying the truth became. The man who had lived there, Jonathan Reeves, was once a well-respected doctor, known for his intelligence and charm. But something had changed him. His wife, Eleanor, had begun showing signs of illness. At least, that's what the records claimed. Neighbors spoke of hearing screams at odd hours, of seeing Eleanor at the windows, pale and ghostly, before she vanished altogether. The official report stated that she had died from an unknown illness. But there were whispers, stories that never made it into print. People claimed that Jonathan had locked her away, convinced she was possessed, that he had performed procedures to rid her of whatever evil he believed had taken hold of her. But the most disturbing discovery came from a single article tucked away in the archives. It detailed an investigation into Jonathan's disappearance. After Eleanor's death, he had seemingly vanished without a trace. But there was one detail, one chilling line that made my blood run cold. When authorities searched the house, they found something behind the walls. Hidden within a narrow space, barely large enough for a person, was a second room, a room not recorded in any blueprints. And inside that room, scratched into the walls in deep, jagged letters, was a single word repeated over and over. Help. My stomach twisted into knots. The idea of someone being trapped, alone and forgotten, sent a wave of nausea through me. But that wasn't the worst part. The article ended with a question, one that had never been answered. If Eleanor had died in her bed, who had been locked inside that hidden room? I sat there, the words blurring in front of my eyes, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The whispers, the cold touch, the woman in the mirror, was it her? Had she been the one crying out for help all these years? The thought was unbearable, and yet I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. By the time I arrived at the house, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that stretched across the overgrown yard. The air was unnaturally still, as if the entire world was holding its breath. My hands trembled as I pushed open the door, the hinges groaning in protest. The inside was exactly as I had left it, silent, waiting. I made my way to the study. My footsteps echoed. The night was heavy with silence, an eerie stillness that clung to the air like an unshakable presence. The road stretched endlessly before me, cracked asphalt glistening under the pale glow of my headlights. The world outside my car felt unreal, as though I had driven past the boundaries of civilization and into a realm untouched by time. I had been on the road for hours, my eyes burning from exhaustion, but there was nowhere to stop. No gas stations, no motels, just the same winding road cutting through an abyss of dense, whispering trees. The GPS had given up miles ago, flickering uselessly before freezing on a blank screen. My phone had no signal. I kept driving, hoping to find some sign of life, but the further I went, the more the road seemed to unravel into nothingness. Then, in the distance, I saw it, a house, standing alone against the endless stretch of darkness. Its windows were dark, its structure old and weathered, but it was something, a place to stop, to rest, to figure out where the hell I was. As I pulled into the overgrown driveway, my car sputtered violently, and the engine cut out with an unsettling finality. I turned the key, but it refused to start. Just my luck. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the thick night air, the scent of damp earth and decay filling my nostrils. The house loomed before me, its once white walls now stained with age, the wooden door slightly ajar. The sight of it sent a ripple of unease through me, but I had no choice. I knocked, my fist meeting the wood with a dull, hollow sound. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. The wind stirred the trees, their whispering rustles sounding too much like voices. A prickle ran down my spine. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the scent of something old and rotting lurking beneath it. The room was dimly lit by the moon filtering through torn curtains. Furniture sat covered in white sheets, their ghostly shapes casting eerie shadows across the warped wooden floor. I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper, but the house swallowed the sound whole. As I stepped further inside, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. My flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering as if something unseen had passed in front of it. I told myself it was just the wind, just an old house settling. But my gut twisted with a feeling I couldn't ignore. Something was watching me. I moved through the house cautiously, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the suffocating silence. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their subjects staring down with hollow eyes, expressions twisted in frozen grimaces. The deeper I went, the more the air thickened, pressing against me with a weight that felt almost sentient. Then I heard it, a faint creak from upstairs. My heart pounded against my ribs as I pointed my flashlight toward the staircase. The steps were warped and splintered, leading up into a darkness that swallowed the light whole. Every part of me screamed to leave, to get back in my car and find another way. But my feet moved forward against my better judgment. Each step groaned beneath my weight, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before me, doors standing ajar like waiting mouths. The air was colder here, biting through my clothes, making my breath come out in visible puffs. I took a hesitant step forward when a sound stopped me dead, a whisper, impossibly close, right at my ear. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my grip. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the whisper had been real. It had spoken my name. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep moving. The floorboards groaned beneath me as I approached the first door. Inside, the room was sparse, a bed pushed against the far wall, its mattress sunken in the middle. A single chair sat beside it, positioned as if someone had been watching over the bed for a long time. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic. I turned my flashlight toward the wall, and my stomach lurched. Words had been scratched into the peeling wallpaper, deep grooves that formed a message over and over. Don't let it see you. A cold hand of fear gripped my spine. I stepped back, the floor creaking beneath me. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing inward. I turned to leave, but the whisper came again, right against my ear. I ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I sprinted down the hallway, toward the staircase, but as I reached the top step, I froze. Something stood at the bottom of the stairs. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, its body a shadow against the darkness, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if studying me. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing against me like unseen hands. Then it moved, a slow, jerky step forward. The floorboards beneath it didn't creak. It was silent, too silent. I stumbled back, my body screaming at me to run, but my limbs felt heavy, as if the air itself had solidified around me. The figure took another step, and then another, its face still hidden in the darkness. And then I saw them. Hands, not attached to arms, not part of a body, just hands, emerging from the darkness behind the figure. They reached out from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, grasping, stretching toward me, fingers twitching hungrily. A scream clawed at my throat, but I couldn't make a sound. The hands moved closer, writhing, grasping at the air between us. I forced myself to move, to stumble back into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. Silence. Then a single tap. A tap on the other side of the door, slow and deliberate. I held my breath. Another tap. Then another. And then the whisper came again, right against my ear, closer this time. And it was laughing. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was frozen, locked in place by something far beyond fear. The tapping on the door continued, slow, rhythmic, each sound sinking deeper into my mind like the ticking of some unseen clock, counting down to something terrible. My breath was shallow, barely there, and I squeezed my eyes shut as if that would somehow make it all disappear. But the whisper came again, closer, curling around my ear like cold breath. And this time, I understood the words. "You let it see you." A shudder ripped through me. I wanted to deny it, to convince myself that I had imagined the thing at the bottom of the stairs, that the hands reaching from the walls were a trick of the dim light. But I knew better. I had felt it in my bones, in the way the air had thickened, in the way my own name had been whispered from lips that did not belong to anything living. And now, something wanted me to know. I had made a mistake. The tapping stopped. Silence crashed down over me like a suffocating wave. I strained to listen, to hear anything beyond the frantic beating of my own heart, but the house had gone completely still. I forced my body to move, inching backward, my hands fumbling for anything to hold onto. My fingers grazed the doorknob of a closet, a place to hide. A terrible idea, but the only one I had. I twisted the knob and slipped inside, pressing my back against the cold wood as I shut the door without a sound. The space was small, the air thick with the scent of dust and age, but at least I was hidden. At least I could breathe. Or so I thought. The silence stretched on, an unbearable tension that made my muscles ache. I forced myself to slow my breathing, to listen for any sign of movement outside the door. Minutes passed, maybe longer. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but terror held me hostage in that cramped, suffocating space. And then the breathing started. Not mine. It was deep, ragged, just beyond the door. The sound of something inhaling too sharply, exhaling too slowly, as if savoring the air itself. I clamped my hand over my mouth, biting down on my fingers to keep from making a sound. The breathing grew louder, closer, until I could almost feel it pressing against the thin barrier of the closet door. A shadow passed through the crack of light beneath the door, stretching long and unnatural across the floor. It stopped. I didn't move, didn't blink. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. The doorknob twitched. My stomach dropped. It twisted again, slowly this time, as if whatever was outside was savoring the anticipation of finding me. The latch clicked. My heart stopped. And then silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I barely breathed. My ears strained for any sound, any indication of movement, but there was nothing, just the unbearable quiet. Then, with a slow, deliberate creak, the door began to open. I reacted without thinking. I shoved against the door with everything I had, slamming it shut with a force that sent dust billowing through the cracks. My hand scrabbled for the lock, twisting it into place, just as something outside pressed against the wood. The whisper came again, right against the door, seeping through like a sickness. "You let it see you." I bit down on a cry, pressing myself further into the closet. My body ached with tension, every muscle locked in place. The air inside the small space had turned stale, heavy with the scent of something rotten. I dared to glance down, to the small gap beneath the door, and my stomach turned to ice. Feet, but not human feet. They were too long, too thin, the bones jutting at odd angles. The skin was stretched too tight, too pale, as if whatever stood outside the closet had never been meant to walk among the living. And it wasn't alone. More shadows joined the first, shifting and twitching unnaturally, their outlines pressing against the door like hungry insects drawn to a flame. I clenched my eyes shut, my fingers digging into the splintered wood of the closet walls. The whisper came again, but this time, it was inside the closet with me. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The breath was stolen from my lungs as something cold brushed against the back of my neck. My mind shattered, my thoughts spiraling into incoherent terror. I bolted. I didn't care where. Didn't care what waited for me outside the door. I just needed to get out. I threw the door open and ran, my feet barely touching the ground as I fled down the hallway. The walls pulsed, the shadows stretched toward me, the whispering growing into a chorus of voices that scraped against my sanity. I hit the stairs at full speed, nearly tumbling as I descended. The house groaned, the very foundation seeming to tremble as I reached the bottom. The front door loomed ahead, slightly ajar, the only thing standing between me and the outside world. I sprinted for it, but as I reached the threshold, something caught my ankle. I crashed to the floor, my chin slamming against the wood. Pain exploded through my skull, but I had no time to focus on it. Cold fingers wrapped around my leg, pulling, dragging me backward. I clawed at the floor, nails splintering against the wood as I kicked, thrashed, fought against whatever was trying to drag me back into the house. I twisted onto my back, my breath catching as I finally saw it clearly. A face, if it could be called that. Hollow eyes, too wide, too deep. Black pits that seemed to stretch into nothingness. A mouth that wasn't a mouth at all, but a gaping void, stretching, shifting, grinning with something that was not joy but hunger. The hands that gripped me were impossibly long, the fingers tightening as they dragged me closer, closer to the darkness that pulsed behind it. I screamed. I kicked harder, my foot connecting with something solid. The grip faltered. I scrambled forward, pulling myself toward the door with every ounce of strength I had left. My fingers grazed the threshold. Almost there. Almost. A final yank. The air left my lungs as I was pulled back, my vision going black for a moment. The last thing I saw was the open doorway, the night beyond it so close, so impossibly far away. And then the door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed me whole. Story 2. My pulse quickened as I made my way down the dimly lit hallway. The oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and dust, and each breath I took seemed to catch in my throat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that eyes were boring into my back from the darkness that seemed to close in around me. My footsteps echoed, a haunting rhythm that only served to heighten my unease. I had never believed in the supernatural, but the atmosphere in this place was enough to make even the most skeptical person question their convictions. I had come to this abandoned mansion on a dare, a foolish attempt to prove my bravery to my friends. They had teased me for weeks, calling me a coward for refusing to enter the dilapidated old house at the edge of town. Now, as I stood in its eerie, decaying corridors, I wished I had listened to my instincts and stayed far away. The house had a dark history, one that was whispered about in hushed tones by the townspeople. Stories of disappearances and unexplained occurrences had plagued this place for decades, but I had dismissed them as mere superstition. Now, as the darkness seemed to press in on me from all sides, I couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to those tales. I reached for my flashlight, the small beam of light, providing a feeble sense of security as I continued to explore the mansion's twisted, labyrinthine passages. My hand trembled as I gripped the flashlight tighter, the cold metal a stark contrast to the clammy sweat that coated my skin. I stumbled upon a door at the end of the hallway, its once ornate carvings now obscured by layers of grime and neglect. With a deep breath, I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest as I stepped into the room beyond. The room was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from the weak beam of my flashlight. As I swept the light across the space, I saw that it was filled with old furniture, covered in dust and cobwebs. An ancient, moth-eaten rug lay in the center of the floor, its colors long since faded. I took a cautious step forward, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath me. Suddenly, a shadow flickered in the corner of my vision, and I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing there, just the oppressive darkness and the weight of my own fear. I tried to steady my breathing, to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling of being watched persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. I knew I had to get out of there, but my curiosity got the better of me. I moved deeper into the room, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. As I approached the far corner, I noticed a large, ornate mirror, its surface tarnished and cracked. The frame was adorned with intricate carvings, depicting scenes of torment and despair. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight illuminating the mirror's surface. As I gazed into the glass, I saw my reflection staring back at me, eyes wide with fear. But there was something else, something lurking just behind my reflection, a shadowy figure that seemed to move with a life of its own. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to look behind me, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, save for the dust and cobwebs. I turned back to the mirror, my heart racing as the shadowy figure began to take shape. It was a tall, gaunt figure, its eyes dark and hollow, its mouth twisted into a sinister grin, and I could feel the malevolent energy emanating from it. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The room was plunged into darkness, and I could hear the sound of my own labored breathing, the only noise in the oppressive silence. I scrambled to pick up the flashlight, my fingers fumbling in the darkness. When I finally managed to grasp it, I turned it on, the beam of light slicing through the gloom. But the mirror was empty, the shadowy figure gone. I tried to convince myself that it had been a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew that something was very wrong. I needed to get out of this house, to escape the suffocating darkness that seemed to close in around me. I hurried back down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. As I reached the front door, I felt a sudden, cold breeze brush against my skin, and I shivered. The door was heavy, its hinges rusted and stiff. I pushed against it with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to open the door. I glanced around, searching for another way out, but the darkness seemed to swallow up any potential escape routes. Suddenly, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, a voice that seemed to come from the very walls of the house. It was a low, guttural sound, filled with malice and despair. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was enough to send chills down my spine. I turned to face the source of the sound, my flashlight shaking in my trembling hand. The hallway stretched out before me, seemingly endless and filled with shadows that danced and writhed in the dim light. As I took a hesitant step forward, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the walls and filling my mind with a sense of dread. I felt as though I was being drawn deeper into the darkness, pulled by an unseen force that I couldn't resist. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but the oppressive atmosphere made it difficult to think clearly. In the distance, I saw a faint glimmer of light, a small beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. I hurried toward it, my footsteps quickening as the whispering reached a fever pitch. The light grew brighter as I approached, and I could see that it was coming from an open door at the end of the hallway. I hesitated for a moment, my instinct screaming at me to turn back, to find another way out, but I knew that I had no choice. I had to keep moving, to push forward and escape this nightmare. As I stepped through the door, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with dusty, old books and strange, archaic artifacts. In the center of the room stood a tall, hooded figure, its back turned to me. The figure seemed to be engrossed in a large, leather-bound book, its long, bony fingers tracing the faded words on the pages. I felt a surge of fear and curiosity, my mind racing with questions. Who was this figure? What were they doing in this forsaken place? I took a cautious step forward, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The figure tensed, its head snapping up as if it had sensed my presence. Slowly, it turned to face me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The hood obscured its features, but I could see the glint of its eyes, cold and piercing. The figure raised a hand, and I felt an invisible force grip me, holding me in place. I struggled against it, but it was as if my body was no longer under my control. The figure spoke, its voice low and resonant, filled with an ancient, otherworldly power. "You should not have come here," it said, its words sending shivers through me. "This place is cursed, and those who enter are doomed to suffer the same fate as those who came before." I felt a wave of despair wash over me, the weight of the figure's words pressing down on my soul. I knew I had to escape, to find a way out before it was too late. I mustered all my strength, breaking free from the invisible force that held me. I turned and fled, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced down the hallway. The whispering voices grew louder, more frantic, as if they were trying to hold me back. But I pushed forward, desperate to escape the clutches of this cursed place. As I reached the front door once more, I felt a sudden surge of energy. The door groaned and creaked as I pushed against it, and finally, it swung open. I stumbled outside, the cold night air a welcome relief from the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the property, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced back at the mansion, its dark silhouette looming ominously against the night sky. I knew I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, but the experience had left its mark on me. Even now, as I try to put the events of that night behind me, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me out of that house, that the darkness has taken root within me. I can still hear the whispers, faint and distant, but always there, a constant reminder of the terror I faced. I know that I can never truly escape the curse of that mansion, that it will haunt me for the rest of my days. But I also know that I must be vigilant, to keep the darkness at bay and prevent it from consuming me entirely. I am, in one word, changed. The events of that harrowing night left an indelible mark on my soul, altering the very fabric of my existence. I can no longer walk through the world with the same naive bravado that once characterized my every step. Even the most mundane of surroundings now seemed to pulse with hidden malevolence, a constant reminder of the darkness that once sought to consume me. In the days and weeks that followed my escape from the mansion, I struggled to reconcile the reality of my experience with the logical, rational mind that had always guided me. I pored over every detail, replaying the events in my head, trying to find some explanation that would make sense of the nightmare I had lived through. But no matter how many times I examined it, the truth remained. I had encountered something beyond the realm of human understanding, a force that defied all logic and reason. I began to notice strange occurrences in my everyday life, subtle but undeniable signs that the darkness had not released its hold on me. Objects would move on their own, shadows would shift and writhe in the corners of my vision, and the whispering voices that had haunted me in the mansion seemed to follow me wherever I went. At first, I tried to dismiss these phenomena as mere figments of my imagination, the lingering effects of my trauma. But as the incidents grew more frequent and more intense, I could no longer deny that something sinister had followed me from that cursed place. I sought solace in the company of my friends, hoping that their presence would provide some measure of comfort and security. But even in their familiar, reassuring company, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that some unseen force was lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. My friends noticed a change in me, their teasing and laughter giving way to concern and unease. They tried to help me, to pull me out of the darkness that had engulfed me, but their efforts were in vain. The connection I had formed with the mansion's malevolent presence was too strong, its tendrils too deeply entwined with my very being. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself growing increasingly isolated, retreating into the safety of my own home in a desperate attempt to escape the relentless terror that haunted me. But no matter where I went, the darkness followed, an ever-present shadow that seemed to feed on my fear and despair. I tried to find answers, to uncover some way to break free from the curse that had ensnared me. But every avenue I explored only led to more questions, more dead ends. In my search for answers, I turned to the internet, hoping to find some clue or insight that would help me understand the nature of the evil that had attached itself to me. I scoured forums and websites dedicated to the paranormal, reading countless accounts of similar experiences and the methods others had used to combat the forces that tormented them. But no matter how many stories I read or how many rituals and protections I tried, nothing seemed to work. The darkness clung to me, an inescapable shadow that grew ever more oppressive with each passing day. Desperation drove me to seek out the help of professionals, paranormal investigators and exorcists who claimed to have the knowledge and expertise to rid me of my unwanted companion. They performed their rituals and cleansings, chanting ancient incantations and burning sage to banish the evil from my life. But their efforts were futile, the darkness merely laughing in the face of their attempts to dispel it. Each failure only served to deepen my despair, to convince me that I was doomed to live out the rest of my days in the grip of this malevolent force. As my mental and emotional state deteriorated, I found myself plagued by vivid, nightmarish visions that would invade my waking moments, blurring the line between reality and the realm of nightmares. The shadowy figure from the mirror would appear before me, its hollow eyes filled with a malevolent glee as it whispered terrible secrets and promises of suffering in my ear. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath, the echoes of its voice still ringing in my ears. My physical health began to suffer as well, the constant stress and fear taking a toll on my body. I lost weight, my once healthy frame growing gaunt and frail. Sleep became an elusive luxury, each night a battle against the terrors that awaited me in the darkness. I knew that I couldn't go on like this, that I had to find a way to break free from the curse before it consumed me entirely. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the key to my salvation lay within the mansion itself. It was there that the curse had taken hold of me, and it was there that I would have to confront the darkness if I ever hoped to be free of it. The thought of returning to that place filled me with a deep, bone-chilling dread, but I knew that I had no other choice. I had to face the source of my torment head-on, to confront the evil that had ensnared me, and find a way to break its hold. I spent days preparing for my return to the mansion, gathering supplies, and researching every possible method of protection and banishment. I armed myself with every conceivable tool and talisman, determined to be ready for whatever horrors awaited me. As I packed my bag, my hands trembled with a mixture of fear and resolve. I knew that this would be the most dangerous undertaking of my life, but I also knew that it was my only chance to reclaim my sanity and my freedom. The day of my return to the mansion dawned gray and overcast, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. I steeled myself for the journey, taking one last look at the familiar comforts of my home before setting out. The walk to the mansion felt like a death march, each step weighed down by the crushing fear that gnawed at my insides. As I approached the imposing, decaying structure, my heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed the terror that gripped me. The front door, once a barrier that had refused to yield, now seemed to beckon me, as if the house itself was aware of my return and eager to resume its torment. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest as I stepped inside. The familiar, oppressive darkness closed in around me, and I felt the weight of the malevolent presence pressing down on my soul. I moved cautiously through the mansion's corridors, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of decay and mildew, and every creak and groan of the floorboards sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the darkness watching me, its malevolent gaze a constant reminder of the danger I faced. I steeled myself, refusing to let my fear overwhelm me as I pressed on, determined to confront the source of my torment. As I approached the room where I had first encountered the shadowy figure, I felt a surge of dread wash over me. The door loomed before me, a portal to the unknown that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling on the doorknob as I gathered my courage. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was exactly as I remembered it, filled with dust and cobwebs, the ancient furniture shrouded in darkness. The mirror still stood in the far corner, its surface tarnished and cracked, but now it seemed to radiate a malevolent energy that sent chills down my spine. I approached it cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the intricate carvings on the frame, each one depicting scenes of torment and despair. As I gazed into the mirror, I saw my reflection staring back at me, eyes wide with fear. But this time, the shadowy figure was not content to remain in the glass. It stepped forward, emerging from the mirror with a fluid, unnatural grace. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me, paralyzing me in place. The figure's sinister grin widened as it advanced, its bony fingers reaching out to grasp me. I struggled to move, to break free from its grip, but my body refused to obey. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its malevolent presence. I could feel the cold, clammy touch of the figure's hands on my skin, and I knew that I was facing the very embodiment of the evil that had haunted me. In that moment of utter despair, I remembered the talismans and protections I had brought with me. Summoning all my strength, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small vial of holy water, throwing it at the figure with all my might. The water struck the figure, and it recoiled with a hiss, its flesh sizzling and smoking where the water had touched it. The malevolent energy that had surrounded me seemed to waver, and I felt a glimmer of hope. I seized the opportunity, pulling out a crucifix and holding it before me like a shield. The figure snarled and backed away, its hollow eyes filled with rage. I chanted the incantations I had learned, my voice trembling but resolute. The air seemed to crackle with energy as I continued, the darkness retreating before the power of my words. The figure writhed and twisted, its form growing more insubstantial with each passing moment. I could feel the darkness losing its grip on me, its malevolent presence weakening. With one final, desperate effort, I shouted the last words of the incantation, and the figure let out a terrible, ear-piercing scream. It dissolved into a cloud of shadow and mist, dissipating into the air as the oppressive atmosphere. As the oppressive atmosphere began to dissipate, I felt a glimmer of hope. The darkness that had clung to me for so long was weakening, its grip loosening with every passing moment. I continued to chant the incantations, my voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. The air around me seemed to crackle with energy, the malevolent presence retreating before the power of my words. The shadowy figure writhed and twisted, its form growing more insubstantial by the second. With one final, desperate effort, I shouted the last words of the incantation, and the figure let out a terrible, ear-piercing scream. It dissolved into a cloud of shadow and mist, dissipating into the air as the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I stood there, panting and trembling, my heart racing as the reality of my victory sank in. But even as the darkness retreated, I knew that my battle was not yet over. The mansion still held many secrets, and I could feel the lingering presence of other malevolent entities within its walls. I had to uncover the truth behind the curse that had plagued this place, and find a way to put an end to it once and for all. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the challenges that lay ahead. With renewed determination, I began to explore the mansion, searching for clues that would help me understand the nature of the evil that had taken root here. The halls seemed to stretch on endlessly, each room filled with dust and decay, the air heavy with the weight of forgotten memories. As I delved deeper into the mansion, I discovered a hidden passage behind a large, ornate tapestry. The passage was narrow and dark, the walls lined with ancient, crumbling stone. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped into the passage, the oppressive silence pressing in on me from all sides. I knew that whatever lay at the end of this corridor would hold the key to unraveling the mystery of the mansion's curse. The passage seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning in a labyrinthine maze that left me disoriented and uneasy. The air grew colder and more stagnant the deeper I went, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. I pressed on, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls as I navigated the treacherous path. Finally, I reached a heavy, iron door at the end of the passage. The door was covered in strange, arcane symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling on the doorknob as I gathered my courage. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room beyond was vast and cavernous, its walls lined with shelves filled with dusty tomes and bizarre artifacts. In the center of the room stood an ancient stone altar, its surface covered in strange, indecipherable markings. The air was thick with the scent of decay and ancient power, and I could feel the malevolent presence of the entities that had plagued the mansion. As I approached the altar, I noticed a large, leather-bound book lying open on its surface. The pages were filled with strange, arcane symbols that seemed to writhe and twist before my eyes. I could feel the dark energy emanating from the book, a palpable force that sent shivers down my spine. I knew that this book held the key to understanding the curse and finding a way to break it. I began to study the book, my eyes scanning the symbols as I tried to make sense of the ancient language. The more I read, the more I began to understand the true nature of the curse that had plagued the mansion. It was a dark and powerful force, bound to the very stones of the building by a malevolent entity that had been summoned centuries ago. The entity fed on the fear and despair of those who entered the mansion, drawing strength from their suffering and using it to maintain its hold on the world. I realized that the only way to break the curse was to confront the entity and banish it from the mansion. But to do so, I would need to gather the necessary tools and perform a ritual that would sever the entity's ties to this world. The book provided detailed instructions on how to perform the ritual, but it was clear that it would be a dangerous and difficult task. I would need to gather several rare and powerful artifacts, each one imbued with the energy needed to counteract the entity's malevolent power. With the knowledge I had gained from the book, I set out to gather the artifacts, determined to put an end to the curse once and for all. The first artifact was a crystal amulet, said to be hidden in a secret chamber beneath the mansion. I carefully followed the instructions in the book, searching for hidden switches and concealed passages that would lead me to the chamber. After hours of searching, I finally discovered a hidden trapdoor in the floor of one of the mansion's many rooms. I pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into the darkness below. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for the journey ahead and began to descend the stairs, my flashlight illuminating the ancient stone walls. As I made my way down, the air grew colder and more oppressive the deeper I went, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me. But I pressed on, determined to find the amulet and put an end to the curse. Finally, I reached the bottom of the staircase and found myself in a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls were covered in strange, arcane symbols, and in the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested the crystal amulet. I approached the pedestal cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached out to take the amulet. As my fingers closed around the cool, smooth surface of the crystal, I felt a surge of energy course through me. The amulet seemed to pulse with a vibrant, otherworldly light, and I knew that I had found the first piece of the puzzle. With the amulet in hand, I made my way back up the staircase and began to search for the remaining artifacts. Each one was hidden in a different part of the mansion, and each one presented its own set of challenges and dangers. But with the knowledge I had gained from the book and the power of the amulet to guide me, I was able to locate and retrieve each artifact in turn. The second artifact was a silver dagger, said to be hidden in a crypt beneath the mansion's grounds. The crypt was a dark and foreboding place, filled with the remains of those who had once lived in the mansion and fallen victim to its curse. I navigated the narrow, winding passages of the crypt, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls as I searched for the dagger. Finally, I discovered a small, ornate chest hidden in a recess in the wall. I pried it open, revealing the silver dagger nestled within. The blade seemed to gleam with an inner light, and I could feel its power resonating with the energy of the amulet. With the dagger in hand, I made my way back to the surface, the weight of the artifacts a constant reminder of the task that lay ahead. The third artifact was a book of ancient spells, said to be hidden in the mansion's library. The library was a vast, sprawling room filled with rows upon rows of dusty tomes and ancient manuscripts. I spent hours searching the shelves, my fingers tracing the spines of the books as I scanned the titles for any hint of the spellbook. Finally, I discovered a hidden compartment behind one of the shelves, revealing the ancient spellbook within. The pages were filled with arcane symbols and incantations, each one a key to unlocking the power needed to banish the entity. With the spellbook in hand, I felt a renewed sense of determination, knowing that I was one step closer to breaking the curse. The final artifact was a set of ancient runestones, said to be hidden in a secret garden behind the mansion. The garden was overgrown and wild, the once carefully tended plants now twisted and gnarled with neglect. I carefully navigated the tangled undergrowth, searching for any sign of the runestones. After hours of searching, I discovered a small, hidden alcove beneath the large, ancient tree. The runestones were nestled within, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. As I took the runestones in my hands, I felt a surge of energy course through me, and I knew that I had finally gathered all the necessary tools to perform the ritual. With the artifacts in hand, I returned to the chamber beneath the mansion, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I carefully arranged the artifacts on the altar, following the instructions in the book to the letter. As I began to chant the incantations, I could feel the energy in the room shifting, the air growing heavy with the weight of ancient power. The malevolent presence that had plagued the mansion seemed to awaken, its dark energy swirling around me as I continued the ritual. I could feel the entity's anger and fear, its desperate attempts to maintain its hold on the world. But I pressed on, my voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. As I completed the final incantation, the air seemed to crackle with energy, and the darkness that had surrounded me began to dissolve. The entity let out a terrible, ear-piercing scream, its form writhing and twisting as it was banished from the mansion. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and I felt a surge of relief as the darkness was finally driven away. I stood there, panting and trembling, my heart racing as the reality of my victory sank in. The curse that had plagued the mansion for centuries had been broken, and the malevolent entity that had. I stood there, panting and trembling, my heart racing as the reality of my victory sank in. The curse that had plagued the mansion for centuries had been broken, and the malevolent entity that had tormented me had been banished. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and I felt a surge of relief as the darkness was finally driven away. But even as I basked in the sense of triumph, I knew that my journey was not yet over. There were still questions that needed answers, and mysteries that remained unsolved. As I looked around the chamber, the remnants of the dark energy still lingering in the air, I realized that I needed to understand the origins of the curse and the entity that had haunted this place. I needed to uncover the history of the mansion and the events that had led to its descent into darkness. With this newfound determination, I began to search the room for any clues or documents that might shed light on the mansion's past. I scoured the shelves, examining the dusty tomes and bizarre artifacts that lined the walls. Among the ancient manuscripts and arcane relics, I discovered a leather-bound journal that seemed to have been written by the mansion's original owner. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was difficult to decipher, but I was determined to unravel the story contained within. The journal detailed the life of a man named Edward Blackwood, a wealthy and ambitious nobleman who had built the mansion as a symbol of his power and influence. Edward's ambitions, however, extended beyond the material world. He had become obsessed with the occult, delving into forbidden knowledge and dark rituals in his quest for immortality and ultimate power. The journal recounted his experiments and the lengths he had gone to in order to summon and bind powerful entities to his will. It soon became clear that Edward's reckless pursuit of power had led to the summoning of the malevolent entity that had haunted the mansion for centuries. In his desperation to achieve immortality, Edward had performed a ritual that had gone horribly wrong, binding the entity to the mansion and unleashing a curse that would plague the house and its inhabitants for generations. The journal described the initial horror as the entity began to wreak havoc, feeding on the fear and despair of those who dared to enter the mansion's cursed halls. As I continued to read, I discovered that Edward had eventually realized the enormity of his mistake and had sought to find a way to undo the curse he had unleashed. He had devoted the rest of his life to researching ancient texts and performing countless rituals, desperate to find a way to banish the entity and break the curse. However, his efforts had been in vain, and he had ultimately succumbed to the darkness that he had brought upon himself and his home. The journal ended abruptly, with Edward's final, despairing entry detailing his last-ditch effort to banish the entity. It seemed that he had died in the attempt, his soul consumed by the very darkness he had sought to control. The realization that I was not the first to confront the entity filled me with a sense of both dread and determination. I knew that I had succeeded where Edward had failed, but I also understood that the knowledge contained within his journal was invaluable. It could help me ensure that the curse would never return, and that the mansion would be free from the darkness that had plagued it for so long. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I made my way back to the surface, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. The mansion, once a place of terror and despair, now felt lighter, as if the very walls had been cleansed of the malevolent presence that had haunted them. I knew that there was still much work to be done, but I felt a sense of hope and purpose that had been missing for so long. Over the following weeks, I dedicated myself to studying Edward's journal and the other ancient texts I had found in the mansion. I sought to understand the nature of the rituals he had performed and the forces he had sought to control. I reached out to scholars and experts in the occult, sharing my findings and seeking their guidance. Together, we pieced together the puzzle of the mansion's dark history and worked to ensure that the curse would never return. As I delved deeper into the arcane knowledge contained within the texts, I began to develop a newfound respect for the power and danger of the occult. I realized that, while the darkness could be harnessed and controlled. It was a force that demanded the utmost caution and respect. The mansion's history had taught me that the pursuit of power, without regard for the consequences, could lead to devastating and irreversible consequences. In my quest to understand the dark forces that had plagued the mansion, I also sought to restore the house to its former glory. I enlisted the help of historians, architects, and craftsmen to repair the damage that had been wrought by centuries of neglect and decay. Together, we worked to preserve the mansion's history while ensuring that it would no longer be a place of fear and suffering. As the restoration progressed, I felt a sense of accomplishment and pride in the work we were doing. The mansion, once a symbol of darkness and despair, was being transformed into a place of beauty and light. I knew that the process would take time, but I was committed to seeing it through to the end. Throughout this journey, I also took the time to reflect on my own experiences and the impact they had on me. The encounter with the malevolent entity had changed me in profound ways, forcing me to confront my deepest fears and pushing me to the limits of my endurance. But it had also made me stronger, more resilient, and more determined to overcome any obstacle that stood in my way. As the restoration neared completion, I began to consider the future of the mansion and the legacy it would leave behind. I wanted it to be a place where people could come to learn about its history, to appreciate the beauty of its architecture, and to understand the importance of respecting the forces that lie beyond our understanding. I envisioned the mansion as a center for education and research, where scholars and enthusiasts could come together to study the occult and the lessons of the past. To that end, I established a foundation dedicated to preserving the mansion and promoting the study of the occult. I invited experts from around the world to contribute their knowledge and insights, and I opened the doors of the mansion to the public, offering guided tours and educational programs. The response was overwhelming, and the mansion quickly became It started on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening. My wife, Elise, and I had moved into our new home just a few weeks prior, and we were still in the process of unpacking boxes and arranging our lives. The house, a charming Victorian with creaky floors and drafty windows, had an air of history about it. Elise, ever the enthusiast, had fallen in love with its character and quirks, convinced that it would be the perfect place to start our family. I, on the other hand, had reservations, but I kept them to myself, not wanting to dampen her excitement. That Tuesday, I was working late in my home office, a small room at the back of the house with a single window overlooking the overgrown garden. The dim light from my desk lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and the tapping of my fingers on the keyboard was the only sound that broke the silence. Elise had already gone to bed, exhausted from a day of organizing and cleaning. As I typed away, my attention was drawn to a faint, rhythmic tapping noise coming from somewhere within the house. At first, I dismissed it as the settling of the old structure, but as the minutes ticked by, the sound grew louder and more insistent. It was almost as if someone was knocking on a door, but the pattern was irregular, as though the knocker was unsure of where to strike. I stood up, the chair scraping against the wooden floor, and listened intently. The tapping continued, echoing through the empty halls. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I stepped out of my office and into the dimly lit corridor, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As I moved deeper into the house, the tapping seemed to grow louder, guiding me like a beacon. I followed the sound to the base of the grand staircase, where it seemed to originate. The rhythmic tapping now echoed through the cavernous space, filling the air with an eerie resonance. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the banister, before slowly ascending the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, and the shadows danced on the walls, creating an almost hypnotic effect. At the top of the stairs, the tapping grew louder still, drawing me toward the end of the hallway. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I approached the door to the attic, the source of the mysterious noise. The door was old and weathered, with peeling paint and a tarnished brass knob. I reached out and grasped the knob, feeling its cold metal against my palm. With a deep breath, I turned it and pushed the door open. The attic was a dark, dusty space filled with forgotten relics of the past. Boxes and old furniture were haphazardly strewn about, and cobwebs draped from the rafters like tattered curtains. The tapping had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest, and scanned the room for any sign of what had caused the noise. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed a small, ornate chest sitting in the corner of the attic. It was unlike anything else in the room, its polished wood and intricate carvings standing in stark contrast to the dusty clutter that surrounded it. Drawn to it, I approached the chest and knelt down beside it, running my fingers over the cool, smooth surface. Without thinking, I reached for the latch and opened the chest. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs, yellowed with age and curling at the edges. I picked up the top photo and held it up to the light, squinting to make out the faded image. It was a portrait of a young couple, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces solemn and unsmiling. The woman in the photo bore a striking resemblance to Elise, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized the connection. I rifled through the other photographs, each one depicting the same couple in various stages of their lives. As I reached the bottom of the stack, I found a small, leather-bound diary. The cover was cracked and worn, and the pages were brittle and yellowed. I opened it carefully, my curiosity piqued, and began to read the first entry. The diary belonged to a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the house with her husband, Thomas, over a century ago. As I read through the entries, I discovered that their lives had been marked by tragedy and loss. Margaret wrote of strange occurrences in the house, much like the tapping noise I had heard. She described feelings of unease and dread, as though she were being watched by unseen eyes. One entry, in particular, caught my attention. Margaret wrote of a dark presence in the house, something malevolent that had taken root in the shadows. She spoke of cold spots, disembodied whispers, and the feeling of being touched by invisible hands. Her words sent shivers down my spine, and I could almost feel the weight of her fear pressing down on me. As I read further, I learned that Thomas had become increasingly distant and paranoid, convinced that the house was cursed. He had taken to spending long hours in the attic, searching for some way to rid the house of the dark presence. One night, in a fit of desperation, he had performed a ritual, hoping to banish the entity once and for all. Instead, it seemed to have only angered whatever dwelled within the house. Margaret's final entry was a plea for help, written in a shaky hand. She spoke of feeling trapped, unable to leave the house, and of hearing Thomas's voice calling to her from the shadows. She wrote of a sense of impending doom, and the certainty that something terrible was about to happen. The diary ended abruptly, with no further entries to explain what had become of Margaret and Thomas. As I closed the diary and placed it back in the chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was trying to tell me something. The tapping noise had returned, louder and more insistent than before. It seemed to be coming from the very walls themselves, as though the house were alive and desperate to communicate. I stood up and backed away from the chest, my mind racing with thoughts of Margaret and Thomas. What had happened to them, and why had the house chosen now to reveal its secrets to me? As I pondered these questions, the tapping grew louder still, echoing through the attic with a sense of urgency. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I felt a cold hand grasp my shoulder. I spun around, expecting to find someone standing behind me, but there was no one there. The room was empty, save for the dust and shadows. My heart raced as I realized that whatever had haunted Margaret and Thomas was now reaching out to me. I fled the attic, my footsteps echoing through the silent house. As I descended the stairs, the tapping followed me, growing louder and more frantic with each step. I burst into the hallway and ran to the bedroom, where Elise lay sleeping peacefully. I shook her awake, my voice trembling as I tried to explain what had happened. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and confusion, but before she could speak, the tapping filled the room, louder than ever. It seemed to be coming from the very walls, surrounding us on all sides. Elise's eyes widened with fear, and she clung to me, her body trembling. Together, we listened as the tapping grew more frantic, the sound reverberating through the house like a drumbeat. It felt as though the walls were closing in on us, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, suffocating me with its history and secrets. As the tapping reached a fever pitch, Elise and I knew we had to leave. We grabbed what few belongings we could carry and fled the house, not daring to look back. The tapping followed us out into the night, echoing through the darkness like a relentless heartbeat. We never returned to that house, leaving behind the memories and secrets that it held. But even now, years later, I can still hear the tapping in my dreams, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon its secrets. In the months that followed, Elise and I tried to put the events of that night behind us. We moved to a small apartment in the heart of the city, far away from the haunting memories of the old Victorian house. Life began to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the trauma of what we had experienced lingered like a shadow, always lurking at the edges of our thoughts. Elise threw herself into her work, determined to distract herself from the nightmares that plagued her sleep. I did my best to be supportive, but I too was haunted by the memories of that night. The tapping, the cold hand on my shoulder, the diary's chilling words. They all played over and over in my mind, refusing to be forgotten. It was as if the house had left a mark on us, one that could never truly be erased. As time passed, we spoke less and less about the house. It became an unspoken agreement between us that we would not mention it, as though acknowledging its existence might somehow give it power over us. But even in silence, the memory of the house loomed large, casting a dark cloud over our lives. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, a thought struck me. What if the house wasn't done with us? What if it was still reaching out, trying to draw us back into its sinister embrace? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. The thought filled me with a sense of dread, but I pushed it aside, telling myself that it was just my imagination. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I began to notice strange occurrences in our apartment. At first, they were small, almost insignificant things, objects moving from where I had left them, cold spots in the rooms, and the faint sound of tapping late at night. Elise dismissed these incidents as the quirks of an old building, but I couldn't help but feel that they were connected to the house. One night, as I lay in bed, I was jolted awake by a loud crash. I sat up, my heart pounding, and listened for any further sounds. The apartment was silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I got out of bed and quietly made my way down the hallway, careful not to wake Elise. As I reached the living room, I saw that a framed photograph had fallen from the wall, the glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. I knelt down to pick up the broken shards, and as I did, I noticed something strange. The photograph, which had been of Elise and me on our wedding day, was now unrecognizable. The faces were blurred and distorted, as if someone had smeared the image with their fingers. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly cleaned up the mess, disposing of the ruined photograph. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried to talk to Elise about it, but she brushed off my concerns, insisting that it was just a coincidence. Her dismissal only fueled my anxiety, and I began to feel more isolated and alone. I started spending more time at work, hoping to escape the oppressive atmosphere of our apartment. As the weeks went by, the strange occurrences continued to escalate. Doors would open and close on their own, lights would flicker, and the tapping grew louder and more persistent. I found myself dreading the nights, knowing that sleep would bring more nightmares and restless tossing and turning. Elise seemed to be affected as well, her once bright and cheerful demeanor replaced by a growing sense of unease. One particularly sleepless night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't bear the thought of the house's malevolent influence following us any longer. I needed answers, and I was determined to find them. I returned to the attic in the middle of the night, armed with a flashlight and a newfound resolve. The attic was just as I had left it, dark and foreboding, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. I approached the small, ornate chest and opened it once more. The photographs and diary were still there, untouched. I picked up the diary and flipped through the pages, searching for any clue that might help me understand what was happening to us. As I read, I was struck by a particular entry that I had overlooked before. Margaret had written about a seance she and Thomas had attempted, hoping to communicate with the spirits that haunted the house. They had sought the help of a medium, a woman named Eleanor, who had warned them of the dangers of meddling with the supernatural. Eleanor had told them that the house was a conduit for malevolent spirits, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin. She had warned them that once the spirits were awakened, they would be difficult to banish. Margaret and Thomas had disregarded her warning, and it had cost them dearly. I realized that I needed to find Eleanor, if she was still alive, or someone who could help us. I couldn't let the house's influence destroy our lives. I returned to the apartment and began researching local mediums and paranormal experts. It was a long and arduous process, but eventually I found a name that seemed promising. Alice Thompson, a well-known medium with a reputation for dealing with malevolent spirits. I contacted Alice and explained our situation, leaving out no detail. She listened patiently and agreed to help us, arranging to visit our apartment the following week. In the days leading up to her visit, the strange occurrences intensified, as if the spirits knew what we were planning and were trying to stop us. When Alice arrived, she exuded an air of calm and confidence that immediately put us at ease. She conducted a thorough examination of the apartment, sensing the presence of multiple spirits. Her findings confirmed what I had feared. The house's malevolent influence had followed us, and it was growing stronger by the day. Alice suggested that we perform a cleansing ritual to banish the spirits once and for all. She instructed us on what we needed to do, and we prepared for the ritual that night. The atmosphere in the apartment was tense, the air thick with anticipation and fear. As we began the ritual, reciting the incantations and burning sage, the temperature in the room plummeted. The tapping returned, louder than ever, echoing through the walls like a drumbeat. Alice remained steadfast, guiding us through the ritual with unwavering determination. At the climax of the ritual, a deafening roar filled the apartment, shaking the walls and rattling the windows. A cold, malevolent presence seemed to fill the room, pressing down on us with an overwhelming force. But just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving behind an eerie silence. We stood there, breathless and shaken, waiting for any sign that the ritual had worked. Slowly, the oppressive atmosphere began to lift, and the tapping ceased. Alice assured us that the spirits had been banished, and that the apartment was now free of their influence. In the days that followed, life gradually returned to normal. The strange occurrences stopped, and Elise and I began to feel a sense of peace that we hadn't experienced in months. We were finally able to move on from the nightmare that had haunted us, and for the first time in a long while, we felt hopeful about the future. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't help but wonder if the house's malevolent influence is truly gone. The memory of that night, the cold hand on my shoulder, and the tapping that filled the air, it's all too vivid to ever truly forget. I find myself listening for the faintest sound, the slightest hint that the spirits might return. I know that our experience has left a mark on us, one that will never fully fade. We have been touched by the supernatural, our lives forever altered by the encounter. But as long as we have each other, I believe we can face whatever comes our way. Elise and I are stronger now, bound together by the trials we have endured. As I close this chapter of our story, I can't help but feel a sense of both relief and trepidation. We have survived the darkness that sought to consume us, but we must remain vigilant, always aware of the shadows that lurk just beyond the edge of our perception. For now, we can finally begin to rebuild our lives, free from the oppressive weight of the past. We have learned to cherish the moments of peace and happiness, knowing that they are all the more precious for the trials we have faced. And though the floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped into the hallway, the sound echoing through the hollow belly of the house like a warning. I'd only been here 3 days, but the air already tasted different, thicker, older, as if the walls had been holding their breath for decades. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper with character, her voice lilting with the kind of forced cheer that made me wonder what she wasn't saying. Now, standing in the dim glow of the single bulb dangling from the ceiling, I understood. The house wasn't empty. Not really. It started with the attic. I'd avoided it at first, content to chip away at the peeling wallpaper in the downstairs bedrooms. But the noises began on the second night, a rhythmic scraping, like fingernails dragging slowly across the floor directly above me. I told myself it was squirrels, raccoons, anything with claws and a heartbeat. But when I climbed the narrow staircase on the third morning, The door was jammed shut, swollen tight in its frame. I'd pressed my ear to the wood, holding my breath until my lungs burned, and heard it again. That slow, deliberate scrape. Then silence. Then a wet, guttural whisper, so close it could have been right against the other side of the door. "Don't." I'd stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet, and didn't return until sunset, when the door swung open on its own, hinges screaming into the stillness. The attic was a museum of dust and shadows. Trunks lined the walls, their latches rusted shut, and an ancient rocking chair sat beneath the lone window, its cushion sunken and stained. But it was the mirror that stopped me cold, a massive, ornate thing propped against the far wall, its gilded frame tarnished black. My reflection wavered in the glass like a mirage, distorted and too pale. But it wasn't until I stepped closer that I noticed the handprint, a single smudge on the surface, small and delicate, as if a child had pressed their palm there. Except the dust around it was undisturbed, as if the hand had reached out from inside the glass. That night, I dreamt of her, a girl in a white nightgown, her hair stringy and damp, standing at the foot of my bed. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared with eyes that were too dark, too wide, until I jolted awake, my sheets tangled and damp with sweat. The clock on the nightstand blinked 3:03 a.m., and the house was too quiet. No creaks, no wind, just a thick, smothering silence that made my ears ring. Then, from somewhere downstairs, a faint metallic click, the sound of a key turning in a lock. I followed it, bare feet flinching against the cold hardwood, my pulse thudding in my throat. The basement door, which I'd never once opened, stood ajar, a chill seeping up from the darkness below. The smell hit me first, damp earth and rot, like a garden left to decay. My phone's flashlight trembled as I descended, the beam catching jagged stone walls, and the low ceiling hung with cobwebs. At the bottom, the light glinted off something embedded in the floor, a rusted iron ring, bolted to a trapdoor. My fingers brushed it, and the wood shuddered, as though something heavy had shifted beneath it. That's when the whispers started, not from the trapdoor, from behind me. A chorus of voices, overlapping and frayed, rising from the corners of the room. "She's hungry. She's been waiting. You shouldn't have come back." I spun, the light slicing through the blackness. But there was nothing, only the empty stairs, the swaying cobwebs, and the sudden, crushing certainty that I wasn't alone. The air grew colder, sharp against my skin, and the flashlight flickered. In the split second of darkness, I felt it, a hand, ice cold and skeletal, gripping my ankle. I screamed, wrenching free, and fled upstairs, slamming the basement door so hard the walls shook. Dawn found me huddled on the kitchen floor, clutching a coffee mug I couldn't remember making, my mind clawing for logic. Old houses settle, pipes groan, stress breeds paranoia. But as the morning light spilled through the grimy windows, I noticed the mud. Faint, child-sized footprints leading from the basement door to the foot of the stairs. And there, in the center of the kitchen table, lay a photograph I'd never seen before, a black and white image of a girl in a white nightgown, her face blurred, standing in front of the attic mirror. The rest of the day passed in a haze of avoidance. I painted over water stains, scrubbed mold from the bathroom tiles, anything to keep my hands busy and my thoughts away from the basement. But the attic called to me, a low, insistent pull in my gut that grew stronger as the sun dipped below the trees. By nightfall, I was standing in front of the mirror again, my breath fogging the glass. The handprint was gone. In its place, words scrawled in a thin, shaky script. "Help me." I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those words, before the reflection shifted. Behind me, in the glass, the rocking chair began to move. Slow, rhythmic creaks filled the attic, though the chair itself sat utterly still. My blood turned to ice as the girl from my dream materialized in the mirror, not behind me, but inside the glass. Her small hands pressed against the surface like she was trapped behind a window. Her mouth opened, a silent scream stretching her lips too wide, too thin, and the attic light burst with a shower of sparks, plunging me into darkness. The last thing I saw before I ran was her face, suddenly inches from mine, her eyes hollow pits, her teeth sharp and glistening, pressing against the mirror from the other side. The glass cracked. A hairline split that snaked across the surface, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought she'd claw her way through. But the house fell silent again, the only sound the frantic hammering of my heart. Now, as I write this by candlelight, the trapdoor in the basement rattles on its hinges. The whispers are louder, angrier, and the cold creeps up through the floorboards, biting at my toes. I don't know what's real anymore. The girl in the mirror, the thing under the house, the footsteps that pace the hallway outside my door, pausing every night at exactly 3:03 a.m. But I do know this, the realtor lied. The house wasn't empty, and whatever is here with me, it doesn't want me to leave. The candle flame gutters, throwing jagged shadows across the walls as the trapdoors rattling crescendos into a violent, splintering bang. My hand spasms, ink splattering across the page like blood. The whispers swell, hissing through the cracks in the floorboards, crawling into my ears. Open it, open it. She's hungry. I press my palms against my skull, nails digging into my temples, but the voices aren't inside my head. They're in the room, in the air, in the very pores of this cursed house. The cold is alive now, coiling around my legs like a serpent, dragging me toward the basement door. I kick free, scrambling backward until my spine hits the wall, and that's when I see them, the footprints. Fresh, wet, glistening in the candlelight, leading from the basement stairs to where I sit. Small, a child's. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I'm on my feet, the journal clutched to my chest like a shield. The hallway stretches ahead, endless and warped, doors hanging ajar like slack jaws. The attic mirror's pull is stronger than ever, a magnetic ache in my bones. I shouldn't go back. I know I shouldn't, but the girl's face floats behind my eyelids every time I blink. Those hollow eyes, that silent scream. If she's trapped, maybe I can free her. Maybe freeing her will free me. The thought is thin, desperate, but it's all I have. The attic stairs groan as I climb, each step a protest. The mirror waits, its cracked surface reflecting fragments of the room, a sliver of the rocking chair, a shard of the window, the distorted curve of my own terrified face. The words "help me" are still there, smeared now, as if someone tried to wipe them away. I lean closer, breath fogging the glass, and a drop of moisture lands on my wrist. Cold, thick. I look up. The ceiling is weeping. Black liquid oozes between the floorboards above, dripping in fat, deliberate drops. It hits the mirror with a sizzle, etching tiny scars into the glass. The air reeks of burnt hair and copper. I stumble back, but the mirror's surface ripples like water, and she's there again. The girl, her nightgown stained now, her hair matted with the same black substance. She pounds against the glass, mouth stretched in a scream I can't hear, and the cracks spread, splintering toward the edges. Behind her, shadows writhe, formless and ravenous. She's not alone in there. A crash from downstairs shatters the moment. The trapdoor. It's open. I can feel it in the pull of the air, in the way the house seems to inhale, deep and eager. The girl's hand slams against the mirror one last time, leaving a bloody palm print, and then she's gone. The mirror goes dark, reflecting nothing but the attic's gloom. I'm halfway down the stairs when the first howl rises from the basement, a guttural, wet sound that shakes the walls. It's not human. It's not animal. It's something else. The kitchen is a war zone. Cabinets hang open, dishes shattered on the floor, and the photograph of the girl lies torn in half on the table. The basement door yawns wide, darkness spilling out like smoke. I should run, get in the car, drive until the house is a speck in the rear view. But the mud-streaked footprints lead me forward, down, down, down into the earth. The flashlight app on my phone flickers, useless, but the walls themselves seem to pulse with a faint, sickly glow, fungal, phosphorescent. The trapdoor gapes open, its iron ring twisted off its hinges. A ladder descends into the black, the rung slick with something that glistens. I climb. The shaft is narrow, the air so thick I choke on it. Below, the sound of water, dripping, rushing, a subterranean river. My feet hit wet stone, and the flashlight finally steadies, revealing a cavern. Roots dangle from the ceiling, knotted and throbbing as though alive. The walls are carved with symbols, crude and jagged, their grooves stained brown. Blood, old blood, and in the center of the room, a well. It's ancient, the stones green with slime, the wooden bucket rotted to splinters. But the water is still, black as oil, and the whispers pour from it like steam. She's here. She's here. She's here. I edge closer, drawn against my will, and the water ripples. A face surfaces, not the girl's. This face is bloated, flesh sagging, eyes milky and lidless. A corpse's face. A corpse that smiles. Hands burst from the water, skeletal, flesh sloughing off bone, and seize my wrists. The foam clatters to the ground as I'm dragged forward, my chest hitting the well's edge, the stench of rot flooding my nostrils. The corpse's mouth unhinges, a black tongue lolling, and the whispers become a roar. Feast, sister, feast. A shriek splits the air, high and piercing, and the hands recoil. The girl stands at the base of the ladder, her form flickering, half transparent. The water stills, the corpse sinks, and the cavern falls silent. She points upward, her eyes pleading, then fades like smoke. I don't hesitate. I climb, scramble, flee, the howls rising again behind me, shaking dust from the stones. I don't stop until I'm back in the kitchen, the basement door locked, a chair wedged under the knob. Morning brings no relief. The house is different now, walls blistering with damp, floors warped into unnatural slopes, the attic mirrors cracks oozing that same black sludge. I find the journal in the pantry, tucked behind cans of soup I don't remember buying. The pages are brittle, the handwriting spidery and frantic. They called her a witch. The first entry reads, 1867. They bound her to the mirror, her soul anchored to this house. But the well demanded balance. A life for a life. They fed it to children first. It wasn't enough. The entries degrade, sentences fragmenting into madness. The well is hungry. It wears their faces. It's in the walls. Don't trust the girl. The last page is a sketch, the well, the corpse's face, and the girl, her body dissolving into roots. I spend the day digging. The local library's archives are scant, but the microfilm coughs up a headline. Entire family vanishes in night of madness. Father drowns children in well, claims. The house demanded it. The date, October 31st, 1893. A photo shows the family. Stern parents, 3 daughters in white dresses. The youngest stares at the camera, her eyes dark, her smile too sharp. The librarian eyes me as I leave, her voice trailing after me. That house, folks say it's a crossroads. A door. Some things that go and don't come out the same. Night falls faster now, the shadows clotting like blood. I've boarded the windows, salted the thresholds, hung iron nails over every door. Superstition? Maybe. But the attic mirror is quiet, the basement still, until 3:03 a.m. The clock blinks. The house exhales. The girl stands at the foot of my bed, solid now, her nightgown dripping well water. She holds a finger to her lips, then points to the door. The hallway is a tunnel of shadows, but the attic light burns faintly above. She floats ahead, beckoning, and I follow, compelled by something deeper than fear. The mirror is whole again, its surface a pool of liquid mercury. The girl presses her hand to it, and the glass bends, ripples, parts. Beyond is a forest, twisted, black trees under a bruised sky. She steps through, turns, extends her hand. Come. The well's howl shakes the house, closer now, climbing the basement stairs. The girl's eyes flicker with panic. Come now. I step toward the mirror, the glass cold against my fingertips. The bedroom door explodes. The corpse from the well fills the doorway, her body a mass of rot and roots, the children's faces bulging beneath her skin like tumors. She howls, and the house howls with her, the walls splitting, the floor yawning open. The girl screams, a sound that shatters the mirror's surface, and the forest beyond bleeds, the trees uprooting, the sky cracking. I fall, into blackness, into roots, into a cold, wet throat. I land in the cavern, the well's water lapping at my ankles. The corpse looms above, her mouth a cavern, her hands reaching. The girl materializes beside me, her form fraying at the edges. The journal, she hisses. The binding, repeat the words. I fumble the journal from my pocket, the pages falling open to a passage I hadn't seen. An incantation, the letters glowing faintly. I scream the words, my voice raw. The corpse's fingers inches from my throat. The well boils. The corpse shrieks. The girl's hand closes over mine, cold and final. I'm sorry, she whispers. Darkness swallowed the road ahead, stretching endlessly into the void. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the night, but beyond that, the world seemed to dissolve into an abyss. I hadn't seen another car in what felt like hours, and the gas gauge was dipping lower than I liked. The GPS signal had vanished miles ago, leaving me with nothing but the vague directions I had scribbled on a crumpled napkin. A wrong turn had led me off the main highway and onto this desolate road that wound through thick, towering trees, their branches forming a skeletal canopy above. The deeper I drove, the more the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees leaning inward as if whispering secrets to one another. The radio, which had been playing faint static for the past hour, suddenly cut out entirely. The silence that followed was thick and unnatural, pressing against my ears with an almost physical weight. I adjusted my seat, my fingers gripping the wheel a little tighter. Something about this stretch of road unsettled me. Maybe it was the absence of streetlights, or the way the fog curled along the edges of the asphalt, moving like living tendrils. I checked my phone again. No service. Of course. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. My breath caught in my throat as I instinctively glanced toward the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the empty road behind, stretching into the distance like a black ribbon unraveling into the unknown. I exhaled, shaking my head at myself. It was just the trees. My mind was playing tricks on me. The road dipped suddenly, the car jerking as it hit a pothole. I cursed under my breath, slowing down as I navigated the uneven path. The forest seemed to thicken around me, the trees growing denser, the spaces between them darker, deeper. It felt like I was driving into the mouth of something vast and waiting. Then, out of nowhere, my headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. My heart slammed against my ribs as I slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the damp asphalt. The car skidded slightly before coming to a stop, the beams illuminating a lone woman, standing motionless in the center of the road. She was barefoot, wearing a thin, white nightgown that billowed slightly in the cold night air. Her hair was long and tangled, falling in messy waves over her face, obscuring her features. She didn't move. She didn't even flinch at the sudden arrival of my car. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my breathing shallow. My instinct screamed at me to reverse, to turn around and get the hell out of there. But something held me in place. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the uneasy sense that she needed help. I reached for the horn, pressing it briefly. The sound echoed through the still night, but she didn't react. She just stood there, unmoving, unbothered. My pulse pounded in my ears. Something wasn't right. I rolled down the window slightly. "Hey, are you okay?" My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. No response. A slow, creeping dread slithered up my spine. My fingers hovered over the gear shift, ready to throw the car into reverse, but then she moved. Not in a normal way. Not like a person reacting to a voice. It was a slow, unnatural shift, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. Her head tilted to the side, the tangled curtain of hair parting just enough for me to see one eye. A pale, milky white, unfocused yet staring directly at me. Cold washed over me. My brain screamed at me to go. Every instinct in my body told me to get out of there. But I was frozen, trapped in her gaze. The air inside the car felt thick, suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. Then, she took a step forward. Just one. It was enough. I slammed the gear into reverse, my foot stomping on the accelerator. The car lurched backward, the tires spinning against the slick road before catching traction. My hands trembled on the wheel as I backed away. But I didn't dare take my eyes off her. She was still staring, still standing there. And then she smiled. Not a normal smile. Not a friendly or relieved or even a sinister one. It was too wide, too stretched, as if her skin didn't quite fit right. Her lips curled back, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white, too numerous. I couldn't breathe. Something moved behind her. A shadow, darker than the night itself, slithered out from the trees. It was massive, yet shapeless, shifting and writhing like smoke given form. It unfurled behind her, stretching long fingers across the road, creeping toward me. I hit the gas. The car shot backward, my pulse hammering as the speedometer climbed. The trees blurred past, the headlights bouncing wildly. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. And then, the car slammed into something. The impact jolted me forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest. The engine sputtered. The hood crumpled against a massive tree that hadn't been there a second ago. Dazed, gasping for breath, I looked up. The woman was standing right in front of the car, closer than before. Her head tilted again, the same sickeningly slow motion. That twisted, stretched smile still frozen on her face. The shadow loomed behind her, rising, solidifying. It had eyes now, dozens of them, gleaming, hungry, unblinking. The air around me thickened, my vision blurring at the edges. My limbs felt heavy, my body sinking into the seat, as if gravity had doubled. She lifted a hand. Her fingers were too long. The darkness swallowed everything. I awoke to the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and insistent in the silence of the night. My room was bathed in shadows, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the thin curtains. It was one of those nights when sleep seemed an elusive dream, and every creak of the house felt like a whisper in the darkness. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild, that the sense of unease creeping up my spine was nothing more than the residue of a bad dream. But the feeling persisted, a gnawing sensation that something was not right. I sat up, the bed creaking beneath me, and glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was past midnight, the hour when the world is at its quietest, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, shivering slightly as my bare feet touched the cold wooden floor. With hesitant steps, I made my way to the window and peered out into the night. The world outside was shrouded in darkness, the familiar shapes of the garden and trees transformed into ominous silhouettes. I scanned the yard, my eyes straining to see anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing, just the stillness of the night and the quiet rustle of the wind through the leaves. I turned away from the window, telling myself that I was being foolish, that there was nothing to fear in the shadows. As I made my way back to bed, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the faintest of whispers. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and strained to listen. The sound came again, this time louder, a soft, eerie murmur that seemed to be coming from somewhere within the house. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it the wind, or something more sinister? Summoning all my courage, I forced myself to move, to follow the sound. It led me out of my room and into the hallway, where the darkness seemed even more oppressive. I flicked on the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out, I thought, as I made my way cautiously down the hall. The sound grew louder, a disembodied voice that sent shivers down my spine. It seemed to be coming from the basement. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, staring down into the pitch-black abyss below. The basement had always been a place of mystery and fear, a place where the shadows seemed to hold secrets, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. Taking a deep breath, I descended the stairs, each step echoing in the silence. The closer I got, the louder the voice became, until it was a chorus of whispers, like 100 voices speaking at once. At the bottom of the stairs, I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling. The light flickered on, casting an eerie glow over the cluttered space. My eyes darted around, searching for the source of the sound, but there was nothing there, just the old furniture and boxes that had been stored there for years. I was about to turn back when I noticed it, a small, dusty book lying on the floor, as if it had been placed there deliberately. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and brushed off the dust. The cover was plain, with no title or author, and the pages were yellowed with age. I opened it, the musty smell of old paper filling my nostrils. The writing inside was strange, a language I couldn't understand, but as I flipped through the pages, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I realized with a jolt that they were coming from the book. I dropped it, my heart racing, and backed away. The book lay there, open, the pages fluttering as if caught in an invisible breeze. I wanted to run, to escape the house and the eerie whispers, but I found myself drawn to it, compelled to understand its secrets. I picked it up again, my fingers tracing the strange symbols on the pages. As I stared at the writing, the words seemed to shift and change, forming shapes and images that danced before my eyes. Suddenly, the room grew colder, the temperature plummeting to a bone-chilling cold. I could see my breath in the air, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, more menacing. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices that filled my mind, drowning out my thoughts. I tried to close the book, but my hands wouldn't obey, as if they were being controlled by some unseen force. The symbols on the pages glowed with an eerie light, and I felt a strange sensation, as if the book was drawing me in, pulling me into its world. I fought against it, struggling to break free, but it was no use. The darkness closed in around me, and I felt myself falling into the book and the world of shadows it contained. I landed with a thud, the air knocked out of me. I was no longer in the basement, but in a dark, twisted version of it. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with ancient tomes that seemed to pulsate with a dark energy. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the whispers were louder than ever, a constant murmur that filled my mind. I stood, my legs trembling, and looked around. The basement was larger than it should have been, stretching out into the darkness. I could see shapes moving in the shadows, and I realized with a jolt that I was not alone. Figures emerged from the darkness, their faces hidden in the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They moved towards me, their whispers growing louder, more urgent. I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out, to escape this nightmare, but I had no idea how. The figures closed in, their whispers forming a single word that echoed in my mind, run. I turned and ran, my heart pounding, as the shadows closed in around me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from the voices, from the darkness that threatened to consume me. The basement seemed to stretch on forever, a labyrinth of bookshelves and shadows. I stumbled and fell, my hands scraping against the rough floor, but I pushed myself up and kept running. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the darkness closing in around me. I was running out of time, running out of hope. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw it, a faint light in the distance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I ran towards it, my legs burning with the effort, and burst into the light. I found myself back in the basement, the familiar clutter and musty smell a welcome relief. The book lay on the floor, closed, the whispers silenced. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and stared at it. I knew I couldn't keep it, couldn't risk opening it again. I needed to get rid of it, to destroy it. I climbed the stairs, my legs trembling, and made my way to the fireplace. The fire was still burning, the flames casting a warm glow over the room. I threw the book into the fire, watching as the flames consumed it, the pages curling and blackening. As the book burned, I felt a sense of relief. A weight lifted from my shoulders. The whispers were gone, the darkness banished. I knew I would never forget the night, the terror I had experienced, but I also knew that I had faced it, and survived. I climbed back into bed, exhausted but at peace, and let sleep claim me. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside my window. The sun was shining, the sky a clear blue. It was as if the night before had been a bad dream, a nightmare that had no place in the light of day. But as I stood in front of the fireplace, staring at the ashes of the book, I knew it had been real. The shadows, the whispers, the darkness, they were all real. And I knew, deep down, that they were not gone, that they were waiting, biding their time. And one day, they would return. But for now, I was safe. For now, the house was just a house, and the basement just a basement, and the night was just a night. But I knew better. I knew that the darkness was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for its chance to rise again. And when it did, I would be ready. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night began to fade, replaced by the routines of daily life. But deep down, I knew that the darkness was never truly gone. It lingered in the corners of my mind, a shadow that refused to be banished by the light of day. I went about my life, trying to push the memories away, but there were moments when the whispers would return, faint and fleeting, like echoes of a nightmare. One evening, as I sat in my study, going through some old papers, I felt that familiar sense of unease creeping up my spine. The room grew colder, the shadows longer, and the air seemed to thicken with a presence I couldn't see, but could feel. I looked around, half expecting to see the figures from the basement emerging from the darkness. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the house and the flickering light of the fireplace. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just my imagination, but the unease persisted. I decided to take a walk, hoping that the fresh air would clear my mind. As I stepped outside, the cool night air enveloped me, and I breathed in deeply, trying to calm my racing heart. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the garden, and the trees whispered in the breeze. I walked along the familiar path, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet a comforting sound. But as I neared the edge of the garden, I heard it, the faintest of whispers, carried on the wind. I stopped, straining to listen, and the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was the same eerie murmur I had heard in the basement, the same disembodied voices that had haunted my nightmares. My heart pounded in my chest, and I turned to leave, but something held me back. A strange compulsion, an urge to follow the whispers and uncover their source. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing in the silence, until I reached the old oak tree at the far end of the garden. The tree had always been a place of comfort, its gnarled branches a testament to the passage of time, but now it seemed menacing, its shadow a dark pool on the ground. I circled the tree, the whispers growing louder with each step, until I saw it a small, hidden door set into the base of the trunk. I had never noticed it before, and I wondered how it could have gone unnoticed for so long. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow passage that seemed to lead into the depths of the earth. A part of me wanted to turn back, to close the door and pretend I had never seen it, but the whispers urged me forward. I stepped into the passage, the walls pressing in on me, and began to descend. The air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. The whispers were all around me now, a cacophony of voices that filled my mind, drowning out my thoughts. The passage seemed to go on forever, a never-ending descent into the unknown. My legs burned with the effort, but I couldn't stop, couldn't turn back. The whispers urged me onward, deeper into the darkness. At last, I reached the bottom, and the passage opened into a vast underground chamber. The walls were lined with ancient symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it lay an object that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. It was a book, similar to the one I had found in the basement, but larger and more ornate. The cover was adorned with strange symbols, and the pages seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, urging me to open the book and discover its secrets. I approached the pedestal, my hands trembling, and reached for the book. As my fingers touched the cover, I felt a jolt of energy, and the whispers intensified, a chorus of voices that filled my mind. I opened the book, and the symbols on the pages seemed to dance before my eyes. As I stepped into the ancient mansion, a chill ran down my spine. The air was thick with the scent of decay and history, mingling together in a haunting symphony. The creaking floorboards beneath my feet echoed through the desolate halls, each step amplifying the eerie silence that surrounded me. I had come to this forsaken place seeking answers, driven by an insatiable curiosity that refused to be silenced. Stories of the mansion's dark past had intrigued me for years, tales of restless spirits and unexplainable occurrences that had plagued its inhabitants. But now, as I stood in the dimly lit foyer, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. Was I ready to uncover the truth? The grand staircase loomed before me, its ornate banister covered in a thick layer of dust. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. With each step, the floor groaned beneath my weight, as if protesting my presence. The walls seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with their oppressive darkness. As I reached the top of the staircase, I was greeted by a long corridor lined with closed doors. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, creating an illusion of movement in the corner of my eye. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I approached the first door on the left, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. It turned with a reluctant creak, revealing a room shrouded in shadows. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the faint light filtering through the cracked window. The room was empty, save for a dilapidated armchair and a broken mirror hanging on the wall. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. My reflection in the mirror was distorted, twisted by the fractures in the glass. It was as if the mansion itself was mocking me, distorting my perception of reality. I tore my gaze away, determined to continue my search. The next room was equally desolate, its furniture covered in white sheets that had turned yellow with age. I felt a pang of sadness as I imagined the lives that had once filled these rooms, now reduced to mere remnants of a forgotten past. But I couldn't dwell on these thoughts for long. I had a mission to fulfill. As I moved deeper into the mansion, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The air was thick with an otherworldly presence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My footsteps echoed through the empty halls, a haunting reminder of my solitude. I reached a door at the end of the corridor, its surface marred by deep scratches. It was as if something had desperately tried to escape from within. My heart pounded in my chest as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What lay beyond this door? Would I finally uncover the truth? Or would I be met with something far more sinister? Summoning my courage, I turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was bathed in an eerie blue light, casting long shadows on the walls. A faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the air, resonating in my bones. I took a step forward, my breath catching in my throat. The room was empty, save for a single, ancient book resting on a pedestal in the center. Its cover was adorned with intricate designs, symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. I approached the book, my curiosity piqued. What secrets did it hold? What knowledge had been hidden away for centuries? As I reached out to touch the book, a cold, unseen force pushed me back. My heart raced as I stumbled, barely managing to keep my balance. The room seemed to come alive, the shadows shifting and twisting around me. I could feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent, watching me with a cold, calculating gaze. I took a step back, my mind racing. What was this place? What had I stumbled upon? The answers I sought seemed just out of reach, tantalizingly close yet impossibly distant. I had to find a way to uncover the truth, to delve deeper into the mysteries of the mansion. Driven by a newfound determination, I left the room and continued my exploration. The mansion seemed to come alive around me, its walls whispering secrets that I couldn't quite grasp. I felt a strange connection to this place, as if it was calling out to me, drawing me deeper into its dark embrace. As I moved through the labyrinthine corridors, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and faint whispers filled the air. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my goal. I had to find the source of the mansion's power, the heart of its darkness. After what felt like hours of wandering, I finally stumbled upon a hidden door, concealed behind a tattered tapestry. My heart raced as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the depths of the mansion. The air grew colder as I descended, the darkness closing in around me. At the bottom of the staircase, I found myself in a vast, underground chamber. The walls were lined with ancient runes, glowing faintly in the dim light. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone altar, covered in strange, pulsating symbols. I could feel the power radiating from it, a palpable force that seemed to seep into my very soul. As I approached the altar, I noticed a series of ancient tomes arranged in a circle around it. Each book seemed to hum with its own unique energy, their covers adorned with symbols that matched those on the altar. I couldn't resist the urge to examine them, to uncover the knowledge they held. I picked up the first book, its pages yellowed with age. The words were written in a language I couldn't understand, but as I traced my fingers over the symbols, they seemed to come alive, dancing across the page. I felt a strange connection to the words, as if they were speaking directly to me. As I delved deeper into the tomes, I began to piece together the history of the mansion. It had once been the home of a powerful sorcerer, a man who had dabbled in dark magic and ancient rituals. He had sought to harness the power of the mansion, to unlock its secrets and achieve immortality. But something had gone terribly wrong, and the sorcerer's experiments had unleashed a malevolent force that had consumed the mansion and its inhabitants. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as I read the sorcerer's final words, scrawled hastily in the margins of the last tome. He had warned of the darkness that now resided within the mansion, a force that would stop at nothing to claim the souls of those who ventured too close. I realized that I had become a part of this dark history, ensnared by the very forces I had sought to understand. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to find a way to confront the darkness, to break the cycle and free the mansion from its curse. I steeled myself, determined to face whatever lay ahead. As I prepared to leave the chamber, I noticed a small, hidden passageway at the back of the room. It seemed to lead deeper into the mansion, towards the very heart of its darkness. With a deep breath, I stepped into the passage, the walls closing in around me. The journey ahead would be perilous, but I was ready. I would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The mansion's secrets would not remain hidden for much longer, and as I ventured further into the darkness, I couldn't help but wonder what awaited me at the end of my journey. Would I find the answers I sought, or would I become another lost soul, consumed by the mansion's insatiable hunger? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: I would not be deterred. I would face the darkness head-on, and I would emerge victorious. The mansion's secrets would be mine to uncover, and its dark past would be brought to light. I was ready to confront the unknown, to face the mysteries that lay hidden within the shadows. As I continued my descent into the old house at the end of Hollow Creek Road had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. It stood there like a forgotten relic, its paint peeling, its windows black and lifeless. The townsfolk never spoke of it, not even in hushed whispers. It was as if the house did not exist in their minds, as though acknowledging it would bring something terrible upon them. But for me, it was an obsession. Every time I walked past it, I felt something watching me from the shadows within. A presence, an invitation, a warning. I don't know what compelled me that night. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the way the full moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the overgrown yard. Or maybe it was the whisper I thought I heard when I stopped in front of the rusted iron gate. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind, but I could have sworn it spoke my name. My breath hitched. I scanned my surroundings. Nothing, just the road, empty and silent, stretching into the darkness behind me. My heart pounded as I pushed open the gate. It groaned in protest, rust flaking off as I stepped inside. The overgrown grass swallowed my feet with each step, as though the earth itself didn't want me to proceed. The front door loomed before me, slightly ajar, as if it had been waiting. The air around me felt heavier, thick with something unseen but undeniably present. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and nudged the door open. The inside was worse than I had imagined. Dust coated every surface, the air thick with the scent of rot and something else, something metallic. The floor creaked beneath my weight, and I hesitated, listening. Silence. Too much silence. Even the wind that had howled outside was now absent, as if the house had swallowed all sound. I took a cautious step forward, the old wood groaning beneath my feet. A shiver ran down my spine as I passed the decaying furniture, the faded wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. My eyes caught a staircase leading upwards, its steps worn and splintered. A strange sensation crept over me, a feeling that something was up there, something waiting. The whisper returned, clear this time, just beyond my ear. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. It was a voice, low and rasping, calling my name. I turned sharply, my breath catching. The room behind me was empty, but the feeling of being watched intensified. My fingers curled into fists, nails biting into my palms. I should leave. I should turn around and walk out the way I came, but my feet didn't move. Instead, I found myself climbing the stairs, each step groaning louder than the last, as if warning me to stop. The hallway upstairs was worse than the rooms below. The walls were smeared with something dark, almost black in the dim light. The air was thick with the stench of decay. My eyes landed on a door at the end of the hall. Unlike the others, which were left open, this one was closed, locked even. A strange sensation stirred in my chest, something between dread and compulsion. I pressed my hand against the door. It was ice cold beneath my palm. My breathing grew shallow as I twisted the knob. Locked. I hesitated, then knocked. The sound echoed down the hall. Silence. Then, a scraping noise from the other side. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run. But the door creaked open. The darkness inside was suffocating. It seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing the weak moonlight that filtered in from the hallway. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, its flashlight barely piercing the void. Something moved at the edge of the beam, just a flicker, barely there. I swallowed hard, stepping inside. The floor was damp. My shoes made a sickening squelching sound. The air was colder than anywhere else in the house, pressing against me like unseen hands. I swung the light around, my breath hitching when it landed on the far wall. Words were carved into the wood, deep and jagged, as if scratched by something inhuman. Don't look at it. The whisper came again, but this time, it wasn't calling my name. It was a plea, a desperate, terrified whisper. Don't turn around. The hairs on my neck stood on end. My breath came in shallow gasps. I felt it now behind me. A presence. Heavy. Looming. The temperature plummeted, ice crawling up my spine. My body refused to move. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out, to never look back. But then I heard the breathing, right behind me. Slow. Raspy. A cold breath brushed against my ear. I ran. I don't remember turning. I don't remember what I saw. But I remember the feeling, the crushing weight of something old and malevolent pressing against me, chasing me down the hallway, down the stairs, through the rotting doorway, and into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my house, slamming the door shut behind me, my chest heaving, my vision blurred with terror. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my room, every light on, my back pressed against the wall. But the whisper didn't leave me. It followed me, curled into my ears like a snake. And when I finally found the courage to close my eyes, I saw it, not in a dream, not in a nightmare, but in the reflection of my bedroom window. A figure, standing in the dark, staring at me, and it whispered, so softly, so cruelly, "You looked." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My body felt frozen, paralyzed by a fear so raw and deep that it coiled around my bones like a vice. The figure in the window didn't shift, didn't waver. It was just there, a tall, shadowy presence standing against the darkness, watching. The whisper had faded, but its presence lingered in my ears, like an echo trapped in my skull. I didn't want to turn away. I knew if I did, if I so much as blinked, it would move. I don't know how I knew that, but every fiber of my being screamed it at me. So I stared. My eyes burned, my lungs ached from holding my breath, but I didn't look away. Seconds stretched into minutes. The room around me remained silent, save for the ticking of the old clock on my nightstand. It felt like a countdown, though I didn't know to what. My mind raced with half-formed thoughts, desperate rationalizations that crumbled under the weight of the thing in the window. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my reflection. I knew what I saw, and it was real. Too real. Then, without warning, it moved. A slow, deliberate tilt of the head. The motion unnatural, jerky, as if the thing wasn't used to movement. My breath hitched in my throat. My muscles locked. A primal terror overtook me. A feeling so ancient and instinctual that I nearly collapsed under it. The figure's head continued to tilt. Too far. Far beyond what was humanly possible. The neck bending at an impossible angle. A low creak filled the silence, like bones shifting, snapping into place. The darkness around it seemed to pulse, to shift as if it were alive, as if it were breathing. I scrambled backward, my body finally responding. and fell onto my bed. My hands gripped the sheets so tightly my knuckles ached. The moment I moved, the thing in the window straightened. Then it took a step forward. My stomach dropped. The glass didn't separate us anymore. It was closer, inside the room, standing just at the edge of the shadows, where my bedside lamp's weak glow ended. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. My throat was locked, my breath shallow, my heart hammering against my ribs like a wild, desperate animal. It stood there, unmoving, featureless except for the hollow darkness, where its eyes should have been. The whisper returned, softer now, almost gentle. "You looked." The voice wasn't human. It was layered, distant yet too close, like a chorus of voices speaking at once, some high, some low, some too distorted to recognize. The words slithered through the air, wrapping around me, tightening. Then the lamp flickered. Darkness swallowed the room in an instant. I felt it surge toward me before I saw it. A rush of cold, the feeling of something unseen rushing forward. I threw myself off the bed, crawling backward, my fingers scraping against the wooden floor. My hand fumbled for my phone. I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but the figure was gone. The air still felt thick, suffocating, but I was alone. Or so I thought. Then the whisper came again, right beside my ear. "You can't unsee me." I bolted from my room, sprinting down the hallway, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my skull. I didn't stop running until I reached the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My fingers fumbled for the lock, twisting it into place. My breaths came in ragged gasps, my body trembling violently. The small, fluorescent light above the mirror flickered weakly, casting long, erratic shadows against the walls. I turned toward the sink, gripping the edges to steady myself. Then I made a mistake. I looked into the mirror. My reflection stared back, pale, wide-eyed, terror carved into every inch of my face. But it wasn't alone. Standing behind me, just over my shoulder, was the thing. No longer a shadow, no longer a distant figure. It was right there, closer than ever. And now I could see it. The face, or what was left of it. Its skin was stretched too tight, its mouth too wide, lips cracked and bleeding. The hollow pits, where its eyes should have been stared straight into mine, filled with endless, swirling darkness. Its breath, icy and putrid, ghosted against my neck. My heart stopped. Then the light went out. A scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate, but it was swallowed by the dark. The air thickened, pressing in from all sides. I stumbled back, crashing into the wall. The whisper returned, but now it was laughing, low and guttural. My vision swam, my mind spiraling into panic. I clawed at the door, fumbling with the lock, my fingers slick with sweat. The handle wouldn't budge. The walls felt like they were closing in, the room growing impossibly smaller. The whisper turned into a chant, repeating the same 3 words over and over, filling my ears, my skull, my very bones. "You looked, you looked, you looked." I don't know how I got out. My next memory was waking up on the floor of my living room, the morning light bleeding through the curtains. My head pounded, my limbs ached, but the worst part was the silence. The house was too quiet. I sat up slowly, my body stiff, my mouth dry as sandpaper. For a moment I thought, hoped it had all been a dream, a nightmare. But when I turned my head, my blood turned to ice. My bedroom door was wide open. I hadn't left it that way. The whisper was gone, but the feeling wasn't. I could still sense it, lurking, watching. It was still here, hiding in the corners, waiting in the reflections, lingering in the shadows where the light couldn't reach. My stomach twisted. I knew then that this wasn't over. This wasn't something I could run from, something I could ignore. I had seen it, and it had seen me, and now it would never leave. That night, I covered every mirror, every reflective surface in my house. I kept the lights on. I refused to look into the darkness, but the whisper still came, curling around my ears in the dead of night, murmuring my name, reminding me of the one, unbreakable truth. Once you see it, it never stops looking back. The house had always been there, at the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the town streetlights. I'd passed it 1,000 times, always in daylight, always with the sun high, and the birds chirping in the trees. It was an old Victorian, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its windows dark and hollow, like the empty sockets of a skull. I never thought much of it. It was just another relic of a time long gone, a forgotten monument to some family's faded glory. But that was before the night I decided to take the shortcut through the woods. Before I heard the whispers, it started with a sound, faint but unmistakable, like the rustle of dry leaves underfoot. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat, and turned toward the source. The woods were silent, save for the occasional creak of branches swaying in the wind. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then it came again, louder this time, a low, guttural murmur that seemed to rise from the ground itself. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the shadows, searching for something, anything, that could explain the noise. But there was nothing, just the trees, their gnarled limbs twisting toward the sky, and the darkness, thick and impenetrable. I turned to leave, to retrace my steps and take the long way home, but something stopped me. A voice, soft and melodic, called out from the direction of the house. It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but it was enough to freeze me in place. My skin prickled, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I told myself to run, to get as far away from that place as I could, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if the voice had wrapped itself around me, pulling me closer, drawing me in. Against my better judgment, I took a step forward, then another, until I was standing at the edge of the property, staring up at the house. The front door was ajar, the darkness inside seeming to pulse and writhe like a living thing. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and I realized with a start that it was calling my name. My breath came in shallow gasps, my chest tight with fear, but I couldn't stop myself. I climbed the steps, each one creaking beneath my weight, and pushed the door open. The air inside was thick and heavy, smelling of mildew and something else, something metallic and sharp. I stepped into the foyer, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. The walls were lined with portraits, their eyes following me as I moved deeper into the house. The voice led me to a staircase, its steps warped and splintered with age. I climbed slowly, my hand gripping the banister so tightly my knuckles turned white. The second floor was even darker than the first, the shadows so dense they seemed to swallow the light from my phone. I followed the voice down a narrow hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet underfoot. The air grew colder with each step, my breath visible in the dim light. I reached the end of the hall and found myself standing in front of a door, its surface scarred with deep gouges, as if something had tried to claw its way out. The voice was coming from behind the door, soft and pleading, begging me to open it. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, my mind screaming at me to stop, to turn back, but I couldn't. I turned the knob and pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was small, its walls covered in peeling wallpaper, the floor littered with broken furniture and shattered glass. In the center of the room was a chair, its back to me, and sitting in the chair was a figure, its head bowed as if in prayer. The voice stopped, the silence that followed so complete it was deafening. I took a step forward, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the figure could hear it. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't move. I took another step, then another, until I was close enough to reach out and touch it. My hand hovered in the air, trembling, as I reached for the figure's shoulder. The moment my fingers made contact, the figure's head snapped up, and I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat. Its face was a twisted mask of agony, its eyes wide and unseeing, its mouth stretched in a silent scream. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. I spun around, my back pressed against the door, my eyes darting around the room for another way out. The figure was gone, the chair empty, but the air was thick with the scent of decay. I fumbled for the doorknob, my hand slick with sweat, but it wouldn't turn. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing closer, the shadows deepening. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, more urgent, and I realized with a sinking feeling that they weren't coming from the room. They were coming from inside my head, I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in that room, the whispers growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. I don't know how I finally managed to wrench the door open and stumble out into the hallway. I don't even remember running down the stairs and out of the house, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. All I know is that I made it home, my body trembling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. I told myself it was a nightmare, a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew the truth. The house wasn't empty. Something was there, something old and hungry, and it had seen me. It had called to me. And now, no matter how far I ran, no matter how many doors I locked, I could still hear its voice, whispering in the dark, waiting for me to return. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to convince myself it had all been a hallucination, a product of exhaustion or stress, but the memory of that room, of the figure in the chair, clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was following me, just out of sight. Every shadow seemed to move when I turned my head. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. I stopped sleeping, afraid of what I might see if I closed my eyes. The whispers never stopped, their voices growing louder, more insistent, until I could barely hear my own thoughts. I tried to distract myself, to focus on anything but the house and the thing that lived inside it, but it was no use. The house was always there, lurking at the edge of my mind, its dark windows staring at me like accusing eyes. I started to notice things, small things at first, that I couldn't explain. Objects would move when I wasn't looking, their new positions just slightly off from where I'd left them. My reflection in the mirror would sometimes flicker, its expression twisted into something unrecognizable. And then there were the dreams. Every night, without fail, I would find myself back in that room, standing in front of the chair, the figure's head slowly rising to meet my gaze. I would wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, the whispers still echoing in my ears. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I was losing myself, piece by piece, to whatever was in that house. I had to go back, to confront it, to find out what it wanted from me. The thought filled me with dread, but I knew I didn't have a choice. If I didn't, it would keep pulling me back, bit by bit, until there was nothing left of me. The night I returned to the house, the air was thick with the promise of rain. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows across the ground. I stood at the edge of the woods, staring up at the house, its silhouette looming against the dark sky. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the danger I was walking into. But I couldn't turn back. I had to know. I crossed the property slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick grass. The house seemed larger up close, its walls stretching up into the night, like the sides of a tomb. The front door was still ajar, just as I'd left it, the darkness inside seeming to pulse and writhe. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I reached for the door. The moment I stepped inside, the air grew colder, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, and forced myself to move forward. The foyer was just as I remembered it, the portraits on the walls watching me with their hollow eyes. I could feel their gaze on me, heavy and accusing, as I made my way to the staircase. The steps creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing through the empty house. I climbed slowly, my hand gripping the banister so tightly my knuckles turned white. The second floor was even darker than before, the shadows so thick they seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. I followed the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, until I reached the door at the end. It was just as I'd left it, the surface scarred with deep gouges, the air around it cold and heavy. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the knob, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were louder now, more urgent, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. I took a deep breath, my fingers closing around the knob, and pushed the door open. The room was empty, the chair sitting in the center, its back to me. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the walls seeming to close in around me. I stepped inside, my flashlight casting long shadows across the floor. The whispers grew louder, their voices rising to a fever pitch, and I realized with a start that they were coming from the chair. I took a step forward, then another, until I was close enough to reach out and touch it. My hand trembled as I reached for the back of the chair, my breath catching in my throat. The moment my fingers made contact, the room seemed to shift, the walls twisting and warping around me. The air grew colder, the whispers rising to a deafening roar. I stumbled back, my flashlight falling from my hand and clattering to the floor. The light flickered, casting the room in a series of disjointed images, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I wasn't alone. The figure was there, standing in the corner, its head bowed, its face hidden in shadow. I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and accusing, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it had been waiting for me. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. I spun around, my back pressed against the door, my eyes darting around the room for another way out. The figure was gone, the corner empty, but the air was thick with the scent of decay. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, more insistent, and I realized with a sinking feeling that they weren't coming from the room. They were coming from inside my head. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in that room, the whispers growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. I don't know how I finally managed to wrench the door open and stumble out into the hallway. I don't even remember running down the stairs and out of the house, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. All I know is that I made it home, my body trembling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. I told myself it was a nightmare, a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew the truth. The house wasn't empty. Something was there, something old and hungry, and it had seen me. It had called to me. And now, no matter how far I ran, no matter how many doors I locked, I could still hear its voice, whispering in the dark, waiting for me to return. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to convince myself it had all been a hallucination, a product of exhaustion or stress, but the memory of that room, of the figure in the chair, clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was following me, just out of sight. Every shadow seemed to move when I turned my head. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. I stopped sleeping, afraid of what I might see if I closed my eyes. The whispers never stopped, their voices growing louder, more insistent, until I could barely hear my own thoughts. I tried to distract myself, to focus on anything but the house and the thing that lived inside it, but it was no use. The house was always there, lurking at the edge of my mind, its dark windows staring at me like accusing eyes. I started to notice things, small things at first, that I couldn't explain. Objects would move when I wasn't looking, their new positions just slightly off from where I'd left them. My reflection in the mirror would sometimes flicker, its expression twisted into something unrecognizable. And then there were the dreams. Every night, without fail, I would find myself back in that room, standing in front of the chair, the figure's head slowly rising to meet my gaze. I would wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, the whispers still echoing in my ears. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I was losing myself, piece by piece, to whatever was in that house. I had to go back, to confront it, to find out what it wanted from me. The thought filled me with dread, but I knew I didn't have a choice. If I didn't, it would keep pulling me back, bit by bit, until there was nothing left of me. The night I returned to the house, the air was thick with the promise of rain. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows across the ground. I stood at the edge of the woods, staring up at the house, its silhouette looming against the dark sky. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the danger I was walking into. But I couldn't turn back. I had to know. I crossed the property slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick grass. The house seemed larger up close, its walls stretching up into the night, like the sides of a tomb. The front door was still ajar, just as I'd left it, the darkness inside seeming to pulse and writhe. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I reached for the door. The moment I stepped inside, the air grew colder, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, and forced myself to move forward. The foyer was just as I remembered it, the portraits on the walls watching me with their hollow eyes. I could feel their gaze on me, heavy and accusing, as I made my way to the staircase. The steps creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing through the empty house. I climbed slowly, my hand gripping the banister so tightly my knuckles turned white. The second floor was even darker than before, the shadows so thick they seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. I followed the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, until I reached the door at the end. It was just as I'd left it, the surface scarred with deep gouges, the air around it cold and heavy. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the knob, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were louder now, more urgent, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. I took a deep breath, my fingers closing around the knob, and pushed the door open. The room was empty, the chair sitting in the center, its back to me. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the walls seeming to close in around me. I stepped inside, my flashlight casting long shadows across the floor. The whispers grew louder, their voices rising to a fever pitch, and I realized with a start that they were coming from the chair. I took a step forward, then another, until I was close enough to reach out and touch it. My hand trembled as I reached for the back of the chair, my breath catching in my throat. The moment my fingers made contact, the room seemed to shift, the walls twisting and warping around me. The air grew colder, the whispers rising to a deafening roar. I stumbled back, my flashlight falling from my hand and clattering to the floor. The light flickered, casting the room in a series of disjointed images, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I wasn't alone. The figure was there, standing in the corner, its head bowed, its face hidden in shadow. I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and accusing, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it had been waiting for me. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. I spun around, my back pressed against the door, my eyes darting around the room for another way out. The figure was gone, the corner empty, but the air was thick with the scent of decay. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, more insistent, and I realized with a sinking feeling that they weren't coming from the room. They were coming from inside my head. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in that room, the whispers growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. I don't know how I finally managed to wrench the door open and stumble out into the hallway. I don't even remember running down the stairs and out of the house, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. All I know is that I made it home, my body trembling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. I told myself it was a nightmare, a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew the truth. The house wasn't empty. Something was there.
I never believed in ghosts. The idea always seemed like a relic of childhood fears, something you leave behind when you grow up and understand how the world really works. But now, after everything that has happened, I can't explain what I saw in any other way. I keep telling myself it wasn't real, that it was all in my head, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I close my eyes, I still see it. I still hear it. And worst of all, I still feel it watching me. It started when I moved into the old house at the edge of town. The price was unbelievably low, almost suspiciously so, but I convinced myself I had just found a good deal. The house was old, built in the early 1900s, with peeling wallpaper and creaking wooden floors. The air inside smelled of dust and forgotten memories, but I told myself I could make it home. I spent the first few nights settling in, unpacking boxes and rearranging furniture. Everything seemed normal at first. Then, on the fourth night, I woke up to the sound of something moving in the hallway. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like footsteps dragging along the wooden floor. My heart pounded as I lay there, frozen in bed, listening. I told myself it was just the house settling, that old houses made noises all the time. But then I heard the distinct creak of my bedroom door as it shifted slightly, as if someone was standing just outside, hesitating. I held my breath, straining to hear, but the silence stretched on endlessly. I finally mustered the courage to get up and check. The hallway was empty. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, though I knew for certain I had closed it before going to bed. I shook it off and went back to sleep, telling myself I was imagining things. The next night, I woke up again, this time to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like someone was speaking just beneath their breath. I sat up, my skin prickling with unease. The sound wasn't coming from outside, it was inside my room. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the room. The light revealed nothing out of the ordinary, just the familiar shape of my furniture casting long, distorted shadows. The whispering stopped the moment I turned on the light. I didn't sleep after that. As the days passed, the occurrences became more frequent. Doors that I knew I had locked were found wide open. Objects moved from one place to another when I wasn't looking. The whispering returned, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always just quiet enough that I couldn't make out the words. I started to feel like I wasn't alone, even in broad daylight. I would catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. One night, I decided to set up my phone to record while I slept. I needed to prove to myself that nothing was happening, that my mind was just playing tricks on me. I placed the phone on my nightstand, started the recording, and went to bed. The next morning, I hesitated before playing the video. My gut twisted with unease, but I had to know. The footage started normally, just me sleeping peacefully. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional shifting of my blankets. Then, around 3:14 a.m., the air in the room seemed to ripple like a distortion in the video. A shadow moved across the frame, slow and deliberate. It wasn't me. I was still fast asleep. The shadow grew darker, more defined, until it took the shape of a tall, thin figure standing at the foot of my bed. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it remain there, unmoving, just staring at me. Then, suddenly, my sleeping self twitched. I stirred as if sensing something, but I didn't wake up. The figure leaned in, its face just inches from mine. The screen went black. The recording had ended. I deleted the video immediately. I didn't want to see it again. But the knowledge of what I had captured stayed with me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat up in bed, gripping a flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The air felt heavier, like the house itself was pressing down on me. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the whispering returned. This time, it was right next to my ear. I jumped out of bed, flicking on the light, but the room was empty. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave. I grabbed my phone and keys, ready to run, but as I reached for the door, it slammed shut on its own. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something on the other side was holding it closed. Then the whispering turned into laughter. Low, guttural laughter that sent ice through my veins. The lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows on the walls. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so thick it felt suffocating. Then, from the corner of the room, I heard the floorboards creak. I turned slowly, dreading what I would see. There, in the shadows, stood the figure from the video. Its form was hazy, shifting as if it weren't entirely solid. But its eyes, deep, hollow voids, locked onto mine. It didn't move. It just stood there watching. I don't remember how long I stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think. Then, in a blink, the figure lunged forward. I screamed, throwing myself against the door, and this time it gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping, and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air burning my lungs. I turned back only once. The house was silent, dark, and still. But in the upstairs window, just barely visible in the moonlight, I saw it watching me. I haven't gone back. My belongings are still inside, but I don't care. I can't explain what happened in that house. I don't know what it wanted, but I know it's still there waiting. And worst of all, I know it's not done with me yet. The house had always been there, at the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the streetlights. I'd passed it 100 times, maybe more, on my way home from work, but I'd never really seen it. Not until that night. It was an old Victorian, its once grand facade now crumbling under the weight of neglect and time. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the porch sagged like the spine of a tired old beast. I don't know why I stopped that night. Maybe it was the way the moonlight caught the broken glass in the upstairs window, glinting like a winking eye. Or maybe it was the sound, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest as I walked by. Whatever it was, I found myself standing at the gate, my fingers curling around the rusted iron, staring up at the house like it had called my name. The gate creaked open with a groan that made my skin crawl, but I stepped through anyway. The air was different here, thicker, as if the house had its own atmosphere. The grass beneath my feet was overgrown, each step crunching faintly against the dry blades. I told myself I was just curious, that I'd take a quick look and leave, but the closer I got to the porch, the harder it was to turn back. The front door was slightly ajar, the darkness beyond it yawning wide like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Something inside me screamed to run, to leave this place and never look back. But another part of me, a deeper, darker part, whispered that I needed to see what was inside. The door swung open with a soft creak and I stepped into the foyer. The air was cold, colder than it should have been, and it smelled of damp wood and something else, something metallic like blood. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor, the sound too loud in the oppressive silence. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, its pattern obscured by years of dust and decay. To my left, a staircase spiraled up into the shadows, its banisters splintered and broken. To my right, a hallway stretched into darkness, the doors along it closed tight. I felt like I was being watched, though I couldn't see anyone. The sensation was so strong that I spun around, half expecting to find someone, or something, standing behind me. But there was nothing. Just the empty foyer and the faint hum that seemed to grow louder the deeper I went. I moved toward the staircase, my hand brushing against the wall for balance. The wood was rough beneath my fingers, the texture wrong somehow, as if it were alive. I shook the thought away and started up the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. The second floor was even darker than the first, the only light coming from the broken window at the end of the hall. The hum was louder here, almost a vibration in my skull, and I realized it wasn't a sound at all. It was a feeling, a presence, something that didn't belong in this world. My heart was pounding now, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I wanted to leave, but my legs kept moving, carrying me toward the last door at the end of the hall. The door was different from the others. It was newer, the wood still smooth and unblemished, the brass handle gleaming in the dim light. I reached for it, my hand trembling, and turned the knob. The door opened silently, revealing a room that shouldn't have existed. The walls were covered in mirrors, their surfaces cracked and fogged, reflecting my image back at me in fractured pieces. In the center of the room was a chair, its high back facing me. And on the floor, drawn in what looked like chalk, was a circle filled with symbols I didn't recognize. The hum was deafening now, a roar in my ears that made it hard to think. I took a step into the room, my reflection warping and twisting in the mirrors, and that's when I saw it. The chair was moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it was turning toward me. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from me. My reflection in the mirrors was wrong. My face was pale, my eyes wide with terror, but there was something else there too. Something behind me, just out of sight. I spun around, but there was nothing there. When I turned back to the mirrors, the chair was facing me, and it wasn't empty anymore. The figure sitting in it was indistinct, a shadowy outline that seemed to shift and change as I stared at it. Its head was tilted to the side, as if it were studying me, and I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. The symbols on the floor began to glow, a faint, sickly light that pulsed in time with the hum. I tried to back away, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The figure leaned forward, its form solidifying, and I realized with a jolt of horror that it wasn't a stranger. It was me. Or at least it looked like me. But its eyes were wrong, black and empty, like voids that sucked in the light. It smiled, a slow, cruel smile that made my stomach churn, and then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, its voice a perfect mimicry of my own. The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I finally found the strength to move. I turned and ran, my feet slamming against the floor as I bolted down the hall. The hum was a roar now, a cacophony that threatened to split my skull. I didn't look back, didn't dare to. I just ran down the stairs, through the foyer, and out the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing on the